I will tell you who we can talk to about that to get some specific answers, though. There's a whole collection of folks who work on the Bokeh libraries, and they have been very good, to me at least, of answering questions. Matter of fact, I ran across a problem this morning, and I had an answer in 30 minutes. And it was an answer that even worked.
Thank you for doing this.
Miss Carol, how are you today?
Very good. Got a good crowd.
Well, I don't know if they're a good crowd. We have a crowd. We don't know yet if they're a good crowd.
Oh, they're a good crowd.
See?
How many first-time PyCon people here? First time at PyCon? Yeah. Well, welcome. Hopefully you'll have a wonderful week. You're starting with Bokeh or continuing your day with Bokeh. That's always a good thing. I actually work on Project Jupyter, so we like Bokeh a lot.
You actually helped out with some of the documentation for Bokeh last year, didn't you?
I did.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know.
No. Actually, if you ask on the Bokeh channel, they're very responsive.
Yeah.
If you have any Wi-Fi issues, tell them to use 5G.
5G. Thank you. Appreciate it. Getter. Just 1 second. So, as you guys are logging in and you're connecting to the Wi-Fi, make sure you use the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. We had some notoriously bad problems with the 2.4 gigahertz. Too many people trying to connect all at once, and things got really wonky. It was painful. There was crying. So use the 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. And bear with me. Was it just as bad? All right, so there might be crying on both bandwidths. Excellent. All right, so take one of each of these and pass them around. One of each of these and pass them around.
I have Conda, but it's all set for 2.7. Can they do this side by side? Or?
Yes, sir, and we'll talk about that. All right, so we'll get started here. For those who've not already gone there, the material is up on GitHub. You can go to my repository, Chalmer Lowe, no spaces, no underlines, and go to the Bokeh tutorial. We're going to go through a series of things today, and let me get us started here, okay? All right, so figure out where we want to start. Jupyter Notebook. Boom. All righty, and we don't like that. Control C. All right. All right. There's going to be a part here where we install some stuff. That is essentially part 2. So if you are on the GitHubs and you scroll down the page, we have an install. If you want to kind of get a head start on that while we're working through the introduction, you're welcome to do that. I suggest that you do so. If you have any problems, we can work through them hopefully a little faster. All right. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about who I am, get a little insight into who you are. We'll talk a little bit about what Bokeh is, right? So let me see if I can blow this up just a bit more. All right. So my name is Chalmer Lowe. I'm on Twitter, Chalmer_. And if you need to reach out to me about something, you have a question, Chalmer at darkartofcoding.com. So what do? I'm a founder of a company called Dark Art of Coding. We teach folks how to write code. Also a founder of a Python meetup group in Hawaii called, ironically, PyHawaii. I am a senior computer scientist for the consulting firm Booz Allen Hamilton. People give me data, I look at the data, I try and make sense of the data. I'm a past chair and the co-chair of the Python Education Summit. So tomorrow we are having an education summit. I think there's about 150 folks signed up to come and talk about educating folks in programming, Python, etc. And I'm the introduction to sprinting guy for this year. So every year we have sprints at PyCon. We attempt to try and get folks involved in contributing to open source software. Past 2 years we run kind of a workshop to teach people how to do that. And this year I'm working with those folks and I'm helping to create a workshop. That workshop will be Sunday. So if you have fun here and you want to learn more things about contributing to open source software, come see us at the Intro to Sprint workshops. I do want to take just a quick minute and have a couple people kind of volunteer and tell me a little bit about, what kinds of things you've done with Python, whether it be a lot or a little, and whether you've got any familiarity with other visualization libraries like matplotlib or seaborn. And if you have some sort of a pet project you'd like to visualize in Bokeh by the time we get done. Anybody willing to take a stab and say something? Go ahead. Yeah? Yep. All right, Bokeh's got tools to help solve that problem. And Bokeh, the way I understand it, it's also got interfaces for streaming data. So as new data comes in, you can continually update what's going on, right? So there's something. Anybody else willing to volunteer?
Most of my plotting in Python and not is with matplotlib and seaborn to make it look nicer. And I'm hoping to get this. I run the data team at a paper here at the Oregonian, and when I provide Jupyter notebooks of my analyses for, say, the average reader, I think adding interactivity to let them explore data without having to download the code would be useful.
That'll be awesome. Cool. Anybody else?
Tyler, I've got some dashboards that I've built for polling network devices and things like that, and then showing different graphs. But right now, I'm feeding that data using Flask and Jinja templates into some JavaScript graphing libraries. I'm interested in maybe removing that step and just having Python build the graphs for me, but keeping them interactive and display on them.
Cool. Excellent. And Bokeh, I think, also has a mechanism for interacting directly with Jinja templates and stuff. So if you already have a familiarity with Jinja templating, you're probably going to be in good shape. We'll have to look into that. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what Bokeh is. It is an interactive visualization library. It's designed to target modern browsers for presentation. The attempt here, or the goal, is to try and provide some sort of elegant and concise construction, right? In the style of D3.js, so you have lots of interactivity, and to extend the capability with the ability to look at streaming data or very large data sets, right? In terms of today's agenda, we're going to do some installation of Bokeh and other pertinent libraries. We're going to talk a little bit more about kind of the history, as it were, or the philosophy of Bokeh. We will do a very first basic graph. We're going to have to figure out when the breaks are going to be. Don't quote me on either of those two things. From there, we're going to do 5 more graphs, kind of the most common style of graphs that people see, or 5 very common styles of graphs that people see. We'll talk a little bit about, well, wait, how come that didn't work? And what might go wrong, some of the things that I've run into when I was working on using Bokeh for various projects. We will stand up a very simple Bokeh server app. We will do some conversation about where to go from here and how you can continue the learning process. And look at some more examples, if we have enough time toward the end, of what you might be able to do with Bokeh. I will say that my intent here is not simply just to demo a bunch of Bokeh charts, and certainly that's what we're going to have. There's going to be lots of demos of charts. But I want to try and get as much interactivity as we can so that you are actually playing with the charts and changing the things and looking at them. I want to get you doing some stuff. It's a little hard because there's so many moving parts, right? I can't just say, well, go make a chart. So in many cases, it'll be like, here's some code. Now I want you to change it and see how that changes the outcome and how that makes the interactivity change or provides you with better appearance or provides you with better interactivity. But also as we go along, I'm going to try and provide you with hints and tips for how does one go about finding out more about a library that one is now using. The focus here is on learning more about Bokeh, and I'm going to teach you tips and tricks to learn more about what Bokeh can do, but these are all the types of things you do anytime you pick up a new library. All right. A couple of things. I tend to show this chart to just about everybody when I start a conversation. You know, your programming skills go up, your programming challenges you can tackle go across, and when you're really skilled but your challenges haven't really changed much, you start to get to the boredom side. If your challenges are really high and your skills are fairly weak, you end up in this kind of anxiety phase. The ideal spot generally is to be in this kind of white area in the center where your skills pretty much fairly match up with the challenges you're facing. But the little line is actually kind of where people's skills end up going. Typically, your skills at a particular library or a particular language or a particular challenge don't really take off for a while. You have to poke at it, prod at it, try it, play with it, and eventually at some point, things will click. And when they do, your skills take off. And then about a week later or whatever, you're going to pick up a new library and you'll be right back down in that anxiety curve because you're like, I don't understand this new library. I don't understand how to do this thing. This worked yesterday, but I can't get it to work today. There's no real cure for this. I have this boredom anxiety curve fluctuation about once a week at my job, sometimes once a day. It's just a matter of keep trying. So if you're new to programming here or if you're new to graphing and visualization, just keep trying, keep playing, and you'll get there. How do you actually go about learning any new programming concept? You change stuff and you see what happens. And I'm going to ask you to do that a lot today. I'll give you a snippet of code. Go in here and change these parameters and see what happens. There's nothing to be afraid of. If you break something, you just download the code again off of GitHub and you start from scratch, right? Let's see. I am going to ask folks to buddy up. All the tables are evenly divided into 4. I'm going to ask you to work with the person who sits next to you, right? And every time I say go do something, I would really like it if you would work with your partner and you guys huddle around one of the laptops and you do that thing. There's a couple reasons for that. Each of you will now have a built-in troubleshooting partner. You will not believe how many times I've taught a class or tutorial where somebody's just struggling and the guy next to them knows the answer, but they don't talk, right? And so this poor person is struggling and I've got 5, 6, 10 people that try to help, and that guy's sitting in the back, can't ever solve it, but he's too shy to ask the person next to him. And I don't have the time, maybe, to interact with everybody, so somebody starts to fall behind, they get really far behind, all because they were too shy to ask. So I'm going to try and force you guys into that mode. If that makes you really uncomfortable and you're really stressed out about that and you don't want to do that for some reason, that's okay. Just explain that to your partner, like, hey, this is not for me, but I would appreciate it if you guys would at least give it a try. Plus, everybody now has somebody you can ask questions of, you can discuss things. When it comes time to do some experimentation, you can suggest to each other, hey, why don't we try this? Why don't we do that? One of you can type, and one of you can essentially look over the shoulder and do peer review. Invariably, when a student makes a mistake, it is often because they have mistyped something. They left out a space. They forgot to put a dot. They forgot to put in the right set of parentheses, or there's not enough parentheses on either side. So your peer reviewer is looking over your shoulder, and he goes, before you even hit enter, whoa, you mistyped that variable name, or you need to put another parentheses. So it can save you from having errors and problems. All right. The next thing, I'm going to suggest really strongly that as you're going through this process and you're entering code and you're typing things up, think before you act. What do I mean by that? Probably the number one error that I tend to see is people have mistyped some snippet of code. And an error flies up, there's all sorts of crazy colors, and there's lots of things streaming across the screen, and they go, I don't know what went wrong. And when we scroll back and we look, we're like, oh, you typed names, and it was really name. Or you typed name with a lowercase, and it was supposed to be an uppercase, right? So if you're asked to type something in, look at the command, type it all out, and before you hit enter, double check your typing and just make sure it looks good. If you're like, hey, I'm not sure if there's supposed to be a space here or a comma, just ask. And when I say just ask, how do we do that? So I've tried to give everyone Post-it notes. And if you don't have some, I'll send my colleague around and he'll make sure everyone gets them. There's 2 Post-it notes. There's red and there's green. If all heck has broken loose and something is unfixable with you and your partner, put up the little red flag. We'll come around and we'll talk to you. Try and get you back on track. If I say, hey, go ahead and experiment for about 3 or 4 minutes, try these next few steps. When you're done with those, put up your green flag. As I start to see a sea of green, then I know that I can pretty safely, comfortably go on, and we can continue with the lesson. If I see a whole slew of red flags, then I know that we've run into some trouble and we should take a break or something. All right? At the bottom of every lesson, there should be some sort of navigation to take you to the next lesson. If you're either following along on GitHub or ultimately, hopefully you'll download these to your machine and you'll be working in the Jupyter notebooks themselves. And we'll talk about some of those things as we go. All right. So let's get into the installing miniconda. So for this tutorial, we're going to be using Python version 3.5 or above. I am asking that folks install miniconda. If you already have anaconda, you're good. If you've already got miniconda, you're good. But if you don't have those, install miniconda. And we're going to use the package manager Conda to install a number of packages and libraries, etc. And we'll walk through pretty much most of these steps. Why am I having you do this? The version of Python you may use may not work very well with the version of Bokeh that we're going to try and use today. You may have some sort of conflict in the background. You might have installed some library that doesn't mesh well with what we're doing. So what we're going to end up doing here is we're going to install the Conda package manager. We'll create a virtual environment. We'll make a little sandbox. So you can put all of today's code and put all of today's libraries and packages in that sandbox. And all of your stuff that's valuable to you, you might use for work, etc., that'll all remain unchanged. You don't have to worry about me cluttering up your hard drive with stuff, right? This virtual environment will allow you to play. When you're done with it, you can essentially blow it away and move on. All right. So again, if you've already got miniconda or anaconda installed, you can skip the installation step and you can move down to using it to create a virtual environment. For those who have not yet installed miniconda, there is a link to the miniconda quick start guide. I'm going to let them teach you how to install miniconda. Okay. And then when you're done installing miniconda, you can type in conda list and it should display some stuff. So I'm going to let you guys go through that. If you've already finished, put up your little green flags so I can see. If you're still working on that, just keep cruising, and when you get done, put your green flags on. So red. Say what? Chalmer Lowe. Your partner may know. Do you know?
Not offhand.
Okay.
But I'm looking in C36 miniconda, but no 3.5.
So this will allow you to install version 3.6, 3.5, 3.4, actually even 2.7. So
that's just my start.
this is the most recent version, and it will allow you to install any version of Python essentially that you want.
Then you want 3.5 after I get Conda 3.6 on.
Yep.
Okay.
And there will be a step to teach you to install Python 3.5.
Okay, now I can help you.
Let's see. What do we got here?
Was I said get Chalmer Lowe space
Okay.
GitHub, and it
Hit
found a
enter.
page
Are you on the internets?
for you.
I don't have the power. Yeah, it's on
And
the.
I had to switch to the
PyCon 5G, okay. But
That's right, right?
yes, sir, that should be it.
I thought I was missing something after that.
Well, when you get to my page, there's links to all the repos that I'm in. Why don't we try one of the other? Why don't we try PyCon 2.4? They've been pointing people away from it, but you know what? I'm gonna give both of them a whirl and see what we can get. So you're not quite logged on yet. Oh, could not be joined. Okay, try again. Join up 2.5.
2.4 here.
Try 2.5 again. I mean, essentially your computer's not connecting to the internet, so that's the thing to solve at this point, and I'm not sure. Okay, give it a whirl.
If I need to plug it in. There we
Wait.
go. Yeah.
tutorial master.
Let's see what we get.
Just pop it over to the C.
Well, he's gonna need to connect to the internet anyway, because he's gonna be installing software. Now, since you guys will hopefully be working as a partnership, and if this fine gentleman is kind enough to let you type on occasion, you guys can both study and learn together while this is kind of thinking. All right. For the record, this young gentleman in the back over here with the Nerd Life shirt, that's my partner in crime. He works with me at Dark Art of Coding, so he's also available to help restore any red flag problems. So hit him up. I'm going to go over here. There's a red flag problem. Yes, sir. How can I help?
So, I got all the libraries.
Mm-hmm.
If I do, and I'm in that environment, and it's got Bokeh, it's got
Sure.
everything.
Okay.
I'm using Python 3.6.
That should be fine, but go ahead.
If I launch a notebook, and if I try to do first graph, I get module not found Bokeh, which I've never, it makes me a little perplexed.
Man?
Yeah.
And one particular laboratory is managed by UC. Okay. So, benefits are the same. Otherwise, with the lab. Yeah. Exactly. 13.5 years service. Where do they
With nothing else, I suppose I can kill the environment and try to create it.
That's your laptop. Oh, yeah.
Anaconda 2, environments, graphs.
Yeah, I suppose I could try another import besides Bokeh in the notebook and see what happens.
Yeah, it's a weird organizational structure. So you have people who are in one division, and they'll separate it into teams, but teams will be scattered throughout. So it's all dependent on
Can you import Bokeh
fire Python in the terminal. So, like, is it an IPython problem or?
Right, right.
Yeah, that's every point. That's every point. Okay, so she does not work. She doesn't work on other ones. There's corporate square and there's century. There's two like.
I'm just trying to get some Wi-Fi out of the room.
Yeah, this one's just
You should be able to just make a new environment.
Yeah, and suicide and violence prevention. So we're doing a lot of that. With R. Yeah.
More general purpose than R, at least. Come from a programming background, it's more like gravitates towards Python, where it's stats background. Like with R, that's what I've seen. At least the scientific community. It's like we're a PhD in physics, which I don't. I'm working in science, Fortran, C++, high-performance computing, and data analysis. They use a lot of Python. And R too, they use R. Like Python, natural thing.
I didn't create directory. I didn't do the make create a directory when I created the environment. I didn't think about
I feel like
that.
15 years ago, Perl was more popular. Like this is like I keep meeting people. I met a guy at the convention. I used to know Perl quite well.
And you went through the process, you installed all of the things that were requested. There was like 6 things we wanted you to install.
Reverse engineered Perl stuff rewritten in Python, like places like that. I haven't seen anywhere.
So this is perplexing me.
Yeah, I'd never seen anything like that.
Did you close out of your terminal and reopen your terminal? Because sometimes when you run an environment and you reset the path, your terminal might be looking at an old path variable on your machine and not your most recent one.
Oh, okay. What's the fix for that? Just recreate the environment?
No, you should be able to close your terminal and try and open it, activate the graphs, and let's see if that works.
Okay.
So let's close this out, leave, close this out. I mean, your path should update as soon as you start the environment, but sometimes things get a little wonky.
It's off some people's radar though. I'm not sure what.
So try and start a new terminal, activate your environment, and then we'll see what we get.
If I'm not using Conda, I would just pip. Is there any issue inside?
So Conda is a package manager
Yeah, I know
for
what Conda
stuff.
is. Yeah,
For stuff,
I know what.
pip is a package manager for Python packages. So pip doesn't necessarily install packages that are not Python as well as you want.
For this workshop, is there anything that wouldn't be present in pip?
Well, here's the risk you take. I tried to test as best I could all of my instructions to work in Conda. I did not test a single one of them in pip. So if you would like to go down the pip road, you're welcome to give it a try. That'd be cool. So give that a try. But I can't guarantee whether or not anything's going to work.
No, I mean, it's too much work to test.
But if you wanted to Google, there's a very good article by Jake Vanderplas who does a lot of data science, and he works with the Conda folks regularly. Conda was designed to handle the installation of data science tools that pip can't do. And I don't know if any of the tools I'm asking you to install, pip can do natively or not. I honestly don't know the answer to that. Do you use SciPy? Do you use NumPy? All of them with pip? Okay, good enough. Then you're probably okay, but I haven't tested it.
These are the only libraries you use, right?
For this section, yes, sir. All right. If it works, it works. That's good.
On Windows it's a hell, but I'm
Not using Windows. All right. Are there any more red flaggy things?
So I've tried doing the VM, the next
web errors, obviously. It says retry will get me on my way, but a retry creates a new directory. I mean, it won't. Is there a way to get it to just?
I'm sorry?
It's okay. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
So I was doing the VM of Graph. So it's installing its dependencies for the virtual env. Tried doing a reconnect or a redo. I mean, I could create a new directory under here, but then it's going to have to download the stuff that's already downloaded, and that's just going to add to the problems.
Okay, I'm going to read.
Okay.
Okay, so it looks like it can't access the interwebs
Right.
for various things. Crap. All right, so you have access to the internets. And you said there was a statement where it said you could do some sort of a retry.
A simple retry will get you on your way.
Okay. But what happened when you tried to?
When I try to do a retry, it says value error. The prefix already exists because I'm trying to create the
Sure.
Python. I
So-
don't have enough experience
okay,
with Conda to
sure.
know
So it has attempted to create
the
this
graph's
thing,
virtual env.
right?
Yep.
Now what we need to do, since theoretically the virtual environment has been made, so we now simply need to install and make sure all the things are installed. So what we could do is try Conda install and then Python 3 and see if it'll go from there. Okay, but we should activate see if we can activate you're on Windows or Linux? Yeah, so source, activate, I can't type today, activate, I really can't
You
type
need
today.
a directory. So graph, then activate, wouldn't you?
Activate, graph, and graph.
I don't think that's going to work. It could be wrong, but
All right, so Conda has activated your graphs, and now we would use Conda install to start installing all the packages and see if you can install Python 3. Let's just start with that. Okay.
okay.
Virtual env and Conda, the commands for making it do what it does are just a smidge different. So you might have been thinking of the command for the one about bin / you might have been thinking about the command for virtual environments
Yeah, probably.
versus Conda. Give that a try, see if that helps. All right, what's up?
Just if it'll help anybody, I have the Anaconda installer for Linux and Windows on this.
Perfect. All right. There's a red flag back there, and I will come back in a minute. But we need to move on just a bit. If you're struggling horribly, like I said, partner up with the guy next to you or the girl next to you. Hopefully they have gotten things to work. And that'll at least allow us to keep pace, right? All right. So in talking to a lot of folks, many folks have been trying to activate your virtual environments, and I've seen some success. To activate them, you would use source activate graphs on Linux and Mac, or just activate graphs on Windows. A number of folks have gone down the road of trying to install the various pieces of software. Conda install, and then you name it. Some folks ran into a snag. They were trying to install or create a virtual environment, and they ran into a snag. If that happens and you get something like, hey, there's an HTTP error, I can't get out to the interwebs, and it says try it again, if you try and create the virtual environment immediately, it'll probably say, hey, one already exists. From there, since it's already been created, it may not have anything in it yet because the install process of getting things into it might have failed, but it probably still exists. So you can go and activate it, and once you've activated it, you should be able to say conda install Python = 3 and install these things. So if you run into that kind of snag, did that start to work? Did you get Python installed? Yay, nay? All right, we'll talk. Now, once you have your virtual environment activated, you can go to the GitHubs, And you can go down to clone or download, and you can download the zip file. And you can open that up inside your virtual environment. And all these notebooks should be there. Should be. And theoretically, you should be able to type Jupyter Notebook, and it should run the notebooks for you. And that will allow you to act or interactively work with the code, right? So, if you successfully got Jupyter Notebook up and running, and you have access to the notebooks themselves, put your little green flaggies up. All right. If you don't, if you're not at this point and you need help, give me the red flag. And I'll go back there and start with those folks. Where did my kid go? What's up?
I'm just, no.
So I wasn't able to install any of these other packages, the Jupyter, IPython, and all of these. They kept failing with errors like that.
It doesn't want to connect to the internet. Okay.
Internet keeps dying, so I don't know if
Okay.
that's the problem.
All right. So I have been told by the PyCon people that access to the internets have been horrible as of this morning.
Is there another way of getting these on?
Yep, flash drive.
So some folks have flash drives. I can try and get you some things.
Okay.
So let me see what we've got. You said you had an Anaconda installer.
Yeah, the network's working pretty well for me. So I've got Linux and Windows installers, and I'm working on getting Mac. There's a lot of Macs in here.
Ah, you have one too. Awesome. So this gentleman has, this guy's got an Anaconda installer, which should allow you to keep moving forward. This guy's got one too, apparently. All right, so let's see where we are. Did you try for trying sake, did you try PyCon 2.4, the other
No,
internet?
and
Let's
it
try that
doesn't-
one and see if we can get you on the web with that.
It doesn't show up in the. Yeah, it's.
PyCon 2.4. Okay, let's try that. And worst case scenario, partner up with your awesome partner.
Exact same boat, trying to get down there.
Okay. Awesome. All right.
Is it working better for you now, one at a time?
Nope.
No? Same
I'm still
thing,
stuck
right?
on Bokeh in particular.
Yep.
I got a few installed one at a time, but otherwise
Is it just the location in this room?
I'm not in charge of the Wi-Fi, so I honestly don't know the troubleshooting and why this is a problem.
Anybody else in front having like Wi-Fi issues or anything?
Gentleman in the red shirt over there, he had the exact same problem you had.
I see.
He had that same HTTP message, right? So. You have a red flag.
Oh, I was still downloading.
Okay.
That's why.
All right. So, in the interim, we have an installer that has purportedly all of these packages, Bokeh, blah 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 blah. So you should be able to get all of those.
What would be the steps to installing?
Sorry, didn't mean to touch your hair. He has one for Windows and one for Linux. You're on Windows.
I
You-
have Conda. I installed Conda. I got through that. Now it's just the other packages.
Okay. So the Anaconda installer, can we scroll over if you don't mind to see? I'd like to see how large the package is. Yeah. So that one has everything in with it. It's got Bokeh and it's got IPython and all the things.
Okay, so if I have miniconda already installed, this will not conflict with it. I'll just
It'll
go
put
ahead
it in a separate folder. So. All right. So, the Wi-Fi apparently is horrible. My apologies, right? If I could fix that for you, I would. Not good. I'm going to throw this thing at you for future reference. When you get done in a particular virtual environment, you can deactivate it so you can move on to a different virtual environment or do different things. And this will take you right back to where you were. So let's talk just a smidge about virtual environments and what they're for. They create a sandbox. When you install Bokeh, you install IPython, you install Jupyter into this virtual environment, it keeps it completely separate from all of the other versions of Bokeh or IPython or Python that you might have on your computer. So that way you don't contaminate other projects that you're working on. So that's the beauty of using these. If you're not using virtual environments for your projects, I recommend that you do so. It is a valuable skill set to have in your toolbox, and it will save you a great deal of headache later on when you're trying to get something to run and you've inadvertently installed some new package and your computer is looking for the wrong package or the wrong version of a package. For those who care, the rest of this conversation is a deep dive, and it goes into more depth as to why you use virtual environments and what miniconda is and what anaconda is and those things. But I'm not going to go into that. I'll let you read those things. All right. All right. Next. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about Bokeh. The word bokeh is a Japanese word. It refers to blurring the out-of-focus parts of an image. So you might have a picture of, say, a person walking down a street, and the person is in high focus, and everything kind of to the sides and behind the person is out of focus and is blurry. It's just an aesthetic quality, right? It can enhance a photograph, and photographers will use it to artfully focus or draw attention to something in particular. And that was kind of the idea behind choosing of this name. Bokeh's intent is to allow folks the flexibility to focus their viewers' attention on the parts and pieces of the data that are most important, without losing track necessarily of the context behind the data. So in that picture of a person standing on the street, you can still see the street behind them, see the lights, see the cars, but you don't really focus on those, and they're not clear and crisp until you want them to be. When we talk about Bokeh and how it was designed and the principles behind it, they want to try and capture perceptual approaches, right, that represent data to people who are experts in a particular domain, so they can apply their intuition to the data. They can, instead of looking at rows and rows, they can look at a picture, and they can zoom in on the picture, they can highlight aspects of the picture, select things out of the picture, etc. They want to automate a lot of that work so that you don't have to do it and create a data transformation pipeline, right? They want to empower their users to have this ability to visualize things fluidly. They want to provide useful software that incorporates novel ideas from the academic world on how to do data visualization, right? And if you want to know more about these, I've got a couple links in here on the technical vision behind Bokeh. There are two parts and pieces to Bokeh. There are client-based visualizations. These are standalone objects that you can view in a browser. You can send a file to somebody, they can open it up in their browser, and everything they need is right there, right? Or you can create server-based applications. Stand up a server, they can surf to a web page, they can see the data as they interact with it, say zoom in on something, the server will produce a new data set that is represented by the zoomed in area, etc. The limitation for the client-based visualizations, the ones that fit in your browser, is essentially how much RAM and how much compute power you have. If you don't have enough, it bogs down your browser and your browser gets sluggish. So that's the genesis behind having a server-based app. The server handles all the heavy lifting, and it only gives you the data that you can see in the part that you're looking at of the graph. So again, if you zoom in, it's going to give you a new batch of data for just the zoomed in part. And in addition, essentially, there's some things that kind of happen behind the scenes that help to filter down some of the data that might be displayed until you zoom in on it. All right, so how does this thing work? It's designed so that when you have a high-level object, and you're going to hear me use words like glyphs or plots or axes, those things are all created using Python. Bokeh translates all that into a JSON format. Bokeh.js uses that JSON to create visualizations that get rendered in JavaScript, so they can be displayed essentially in any modern browser. All right? And again, kind of the nuance is trying to display large quantities of data in your browser gets wonky when you're trying to feed it too much data. All right? So we're going to get started on our first graph. This kind of presupposes that you've been able to install Bokeh, and I know there's some problems with a couple of folks. For now, just kind of follow along and we'll see what we get. So we'll look at a first basic graph. In this case, I'm going to import from bokeh.plotting 3 things. I'm going to import a figure, I'm going to import the show function, and the output _ notebook function. I'm going to pull together 2 lists. They're just Python lists. Some X values I want to graph up against some Y values that I'd like to graph. And I start off by creating a figure. And I'm going to give it the name P in this case, or give it a label P. P has a bunch of functions that hang off of it, and we'll see some of those in a little bit. But when you tell it that you want to run the line function off the P figure, you can provide it with a series of X values, a series of Y values, and it will produce an object that can be displayed. When I tell it that I'd like to output this to the notebook, it knows that I'm talking about a Jupyter notebook, and it will prep things to display in line. And when I say show P, it'll do that. So if you've not used Jupyter notebooks before, if you have the Jupyter notebook running on your machine and you click in it, you'll see that you have this nice green box. If you press Control and Enter at the same time, it'll run and it'll execute. You'll know it execute because you'll get a number up here to say, hey, this was input number 1. And hopefully you'll see something like Bokeh.js successfully loaded. And we'll scroll up a little bit. All right. So let me walk you through kind of your first Bokeh graph. A couple things to note. It automatically produced a set of axes for me. That was a default behavior. It graphed all of the points and put a line in between the points because I asked it for a line graph. It produces these kind of gray colored icons on the far right side. We'll walk through a bunch of those as we go through the day. But starting from the top down, you have the colored Bokeh logo. If you click that, I believe that takes you to help. It's got a, blow this up a little bit. It's got the little plus sign with the arrowheads. That indicates pan. It'll allow you to scroll around. If you notice that the arrowheads have a light blue kind of bar next to them, that tells you that that movement indicator, that movement tool is currently active. So if I click on my graph, you can see that I can drag it around so I can center the things that are important to me potentially. You notice when I put my cursor over one of the tools, there's a tooltip that pops up so the user knows what that tool can do. We have a box zoom, so I can click and then drag. Well, let me click on the tool. Notice I've now highlighted the box zoom tool with the blue bar. Click and drag, and it'll zoom in on the points that we dragged to. If you're one of those folks with a mouse and you want to scroll, you have a scroll wheel so you can zoom in with your scroll wheel. That also works with Mac. I think if you use 2 fingers to zoom in and out. If you want to save an image, you can do that, and it brings up a dialog to allow you to save your images in various formats. When you've changed something, you want to reset it. There's a reset button. Click that. All right, and let's zoom back out. There we go. All right. So that's pretty much the standard. That's the default. Some folks may have gotten an error related to numpy. Did anybody get any errors related to numpy when you tried to execute that cell? You haven't got there yet. No numpy errors? Did you? Gotcha. That is a nuance, and we're going to cover that one in what goes wrong. So Bokeh.js, the JavaScript library, is hosted on the web, and so you can always get the most recent version of Bokeh.js. So if your internets are not working well, which apparently they're not here, that's a struggle too. The error related to numpy, my colleague Aiden was working with this tutorial on a Windows machine, and he got an error related to numpy. And he had to actually go in and modify the numpy config. Apparently this is also potentially a problem with SciPy as well, depending on like the version of numpy or SciPy you might be using. And there is some discussion in that particular comment thread. So if you run into that, there is a reference to that particular error. All right. So here's where we get into kind of you guys do some stuff, and that'll give me a chance to also kind of walk around and look at what people are doing. Periodically, we'll have a place for you to earn experience points. So go into the cell above and do each of these steps. Change a few things, add a couple of items to it, see how the graph changes when you execute the new graph, etc. Okay, and I'll go around and we'll talk to folks and look at red things. I saw your red thing. What do we got, sir?
Still waiting for
Internets.
yeah, stuff to download. So the good news is at least it's moving along. So I've got everything except for pandas and SciPy. So I just made a parameter text tray. So I already set up a virtual machine, a virtual environment. So I'm just installing the packages into it. So those are all done now. Waiting on pandas and SciPy. Pandas looks like it's done. I'm getting SciPy. So
Okay.
but it's been this. It's just been like me trying over and over again.
Sure.
Timing out.
But that's the nature of this.
Yeah.
Was there something different?
Yeah, no,
All right.
I haven't gotten to the other stuff yet. So.
It's working for me, so I'm going to have the Mac Anaconda installer in a few minutes if anybody needs it.
Okay, let me go get your thumb drive back. How's it going? Did you get anything installed?
It installed. I'm creating the virtual environment again, and to do that, I ran Conda create. That's right.
Yep.
And then it's gonna create it, I guess.
It
But
starts
is it
with
trying
that.
to install again? What is it doing now?
Well, so the Anaconda installer should have downloaded everything to your computer, and
Right.
now it should be using that
Okay.
to do its magic. That's the caveat. It should.
There's no way to confirm, like which Conda it's running.
That's an excellent question. I don't know the answer to it because I have only ever done this through Wi-Fi when everything works perfectly. I have never run into this particular problem. All right.
Well, I can always
But
kill my
it's
network.
going really slow. What the heck is that? So it is appear to be doing this through Anaconda 3 as opposed to miniconda, because Anaconda 3 and miniconda have two different folders. The default is probably to try and install from the internet so that it can get you the most recent version.
I see. So
If
it's
you're
trying to
sure that the
update
file's there, you can do offline,
which
right?
is
So when you do install Conda, you can do -- offline and then point it to the path of your file.
How do we do that?
You have to make sure you have the file. So I looked this up before for you. Like here's the syntax. Even Stack Overflow isn't loading for me, which is kind of a bad sign, but I got enough. So assuming that your Conda install actually has the, well, we know it does. You already looked it
Yeah.
up, and you could see that it had Bokeh, so you should be able
Yeah.
to point it.
Yeah, so it's installed.
So can you find it in your C? On your drive? I don't know where that
I'm
would
gonna
be.
pretend it's gonna be here, like in my
It
local.
should be in the Anaconda folder.
Go away.
Go away. All right, let me go see what else is going on. Any luck?
Well, I had periods of time when so we're down to SQLite STK, XZ, and now it's working on Python 3.6. Problem is, it hits a period of time when it can't load, and then it
Times out or something?
It craps out, and then you have to, when you do a Python install, or sorry, a Conda install of Python 3 again, it goes right back to doing SQLite.
So potentially we can get you the thumb drive, and you can try and install. There's a Windows installer. Wait, here on Linux, there's a Linux installer on the thumb drive, and it installs all of Anaconda, which is like every library, Bokeh, IPython. The thing is, though, by default, it wants to try and install. No, it should install everything. But when you create the whenever you create the virtual environment, it wants to go to the internet and try and get stuff, because the internet always has the latest and greatest. So there's a command like offline, -- offline.
It's actually moving quite well. I had up to 21-second response time per packet.
Okay.
And it just completed.
Okay.
So now that I have Python 3.
Now you got to install like 4 other things. But all those should be much smaller in size. They're all libraries. They're not entire languages. So keep going. You were... All right. What's up?
Oh, it's just the internet. I don't think
Okay.
I can't download that, and when I do it with another environment, my root environment, it is hanging on Bokeh.js. So I don't think
Okay.
we can, that's as far as I've gotten.
So we do have, gentleman over there is downloading the Anaconda installer for Macs. And you could install all of Anaconda. The problem that you run into is, even though it installs all of Anaconda, as soon as you try and create a virtual environment, instead of going to its local repo, it wants to go to the internets for all of the virtual. There should be a switch like tac offline. There should be tac offline when you do a Conda install, and it should look in whatever repo you tell it to look in. But I don't have the exact syntax, so let me go see what I can figure out. All right. MPLD3. I think I've heard that.
Yeah, Jan Von something. He's a strong.
Jake Vanderposs?
Yeah, Jake.
All right. A number of folks are still doing some of the download thing, and it sounds like some people are making progress, but the progress is slow. I'm going to go on, and hopefully you guys kind of, while that's downloading, just kind of keep your eyes open and follow along. I'm going to talk a little bit about how do you learn more about a new library you're using. All right? So in this case, for example, whenever you have an object and you want to know something more about it, if you're using IPython, or if you're using, by extension, Jupyter notebooks, you can simply put a question mark after that. In regular Python, you'd say help parentheses, the object, close parentheses. But in IPython, it's pretty easy, just question mark. So earlier, we made an object. It was a figure, and we called it P. So we're going to go down here, and in one of these cells, I'm going to execute my cell. And it's going to provide me with a help function or some help documentation. It says, hey, you're looking at a figure, and this figure has certain characteristics. Some of it's written in some gobbledygook. There's a little bit of syntax highlighting in there for when you produce kind of online documentation. But basically it says that this is a subclass of a plot, and it simplifies the development of your plots by providing some default axes, some grids and tools and such, right? And you're going to see me in various cases use this question mark to kind of interrogate objects and figure out what I'm looking at and what I could potentially do with them. All right. When you don't know what functions are available, so I told you this P object had this capability of producing line graphs. Well, could it make other kind of graphs? I don't know. So if you type P and you put a dot and you hit tab, IPython and Jupyter are kind enough to show you all of the functions that hang off of this object. So we see that there's things like add a dynamic image, there's an annular wedge. I don't know what any of these are, but there's a bunch of them, right? And we'll figure out ways to learn more about them as we go into it. We see something called p.diamond. We'll talk about that later. There's things about grids and extra y ranges and x ranges. P.ellipse. And I keep scrolling down, and sure enough, p.line is in there. All right. So when you're looking at a new library, you don't know what the library has available to you, what kind of functions and methods you can call. This is a technique to start to look into those things. All right. But what if you want to know more about a particular library? Well, you just use your question mark. So p.line and a question mark, and I hit Control-Enter, and it opens up this help space down here. So it starts off, it says, hey, whenever you want to make a p-line, you have to give it an x and a y, and you have the option of giving it some keyword arguments. And then it gives you a list of potential arguments, and it tries to define them as best it can. It says, hey, your x should be all the x coordinates for your points on your line. The y should be all your y coordinates. And we saw that. We had a list of x's and a list of y's. And then it says you've got these optional keyword arguments, like JavaScript callbacks, a thing called line alpha, whatever that means. Let's look. The line alpha values for the line. Okay, so maybe that wasn't entirely helpful. For those who aren't into graphical design, etc., when you have something that's colored, alpha is an indication of transparency. So you're going to see alphas a lot, and we're going to use them in a couple of places. They also talk about line caps. The line cap value for a line. Who knows what that is, right? When you go look at lines, at the ends of the lines, they typically will have some sort of a cap. If a line is very large, if it's very wide, that cap becomes distinct. So there's different types of caps you can put on either end of your line. But there's a lot of them. I'm not going to go through all of them. Right? But there's many. And you should spend time looking at some of these. One cool thing, even though there's lots of them, it's kind of a wall of text. Most graphs that you look at are going to use some selection of these. So you're going to see these over and over and over and over and over again. Line cap is available in just about any time you have a line. Alpha and colors and such are available anytime you have objects in Bokeh. All right. So for experience points, what I want you to do is go up into this cell, run that for me, and just start reading a little bit. Take a few seconds, read a few of these things, explore them. We're going to do this several times during the course of the day. I'm going to have you look at these things, right, and experiment. And then we'll move on. Let me go answer a question or two. You got your little red flag up. You're still downloading. Okay. Gotcha.
Are we going to discuss server-side applications?
Yes, in the second half of the conversation, we're going to do servers. Cool. All right. How goes it? It's good to see you.
Because I'm playing around with Bokeh or before doing something with Bokeh for a long time, and I work around it, and now it's a chance.
Well, hopefully you get something out of it. Were you able to get all the stuff downloaded?
Actually, I tried to use daytime as an x-axis, but it just shows me the seconds. Because like if you do the matplotlib, it just converts it to whatever string it spits out, and I'm just expecting it's the same thing.
Later on, there is a place where you can tell it that something you're looking at is a datetime object. So when we get to that part of the conversation, I'll try and remember to point it out.
P-x-axis is datetime or something?
No, I don't remember. We'll have to figure it out. I don't remember which graph it was in, but there is a place where it mentions that this should be considered a datetime object.
It looks at the object and sees it's a datetime object, and I display it with whatever default string comes out of it.
But yeah, there is a place where you tell it that your x-axis values are datetime. something like that. The command or the argument is something like x value type equals date time. Might be. I'm trying to remember it. All right. So we're going to look at another graph. We're going to do it again, but with more. This graph is going to have circles, it's going to have dashes, and it's going to have a legend this time because you want your user to understand what he's seeing. I'm going to warn you ahead of time as we go through the different graphs. Many of them are going to have the exact same kind of stuff on them. So if I've already kind of talked about something, I'm going to gloss over some of that and move on to potentially the newer parts that we haven't covered yet. If you want me to backtrack just a smidge and say, hey, can you talk about a thing? That's okay. Just ask, and we'll do that. Just kind of in the interest of time, I'm gonna cruise through. But this case, we're going to do some more importing. We're also going to import numpy, and it is customary when you import numpy to use an alias. And in this case, we use the alias of np. I create a figure. I give it a name more. NumPy has a library or a function that allows you to create a series of numbers that are linearly spaced between one value and another. So I want 100 values between 0.1 and 5, and it does all the math to space them evenly. So those are going to be my x values. And then I randomly said, hey, let me use a range object from Python, and I'll take from 0 to 200, and I'll skip by 2. The point here is that when I feed a numpy array or I feed a range into Bokeh, it understands both of those natively, and it's okay with that. I don't have to convert them to lists or something else. It's okay with using numpy arrays and ranges, so that's all good. My first thing that I'm going to create is I'm going to create another kind of glyph that goes onto my graph, and this is going to be a glyph composed of circles. So for x values, I'm going to use the x's that we created, and then I'm going to go ahead and use another numpy function called cumulative sum, and it's going to take each of the x values and kind of add them and make a cumulative sum. There's no real reason behind doing this, I just wanted something interesting. The important part here, though, is this. I assign it an argument. I say legend should say, and I give it a string, y equals cumulative sum of y. I can make this say whatever I want. It'll print it essentially as written. The second line we create, this one is actually, again, going to be a line as opposed to a sequence of circles. I give it an x and y value. I give it a range. You know what? I think I screwed this up. Let's change that to what? 200 step by 2. All right, there you go. So I give it a legend to say where these values come from. And in this case, I'm now going to tell it, make this line a particular color. And we're going to get into more details about colors in a second. This one is using hexadecimal representation for colors. Bokeh totally understands that. In this case, we're using Rebecca purple. And the line format is going to be a dot and a dash. Bokeh has a default location that it puts legends, but I want to override that. So I'm going to say more.legend.location, and I'll tell it where to put it. And there is a set of key terms that you can use in here. Top left, bottom right, those kinds of things. And I'll show you where you can learn more about those in a little bit. But you can use these terms. You can also use XY notation to say, put it at this particular pixel location on my graph. And then we run it. Let's see what we get. And so we see I have a graph with a bunch of circles. We have a graph with dots and dashes. This is purple, that one was blue, which is the default. We have the same tools, none of those changed, but now I've got an awesome legend, right? And it automatically uses the line type or the graph type that you pulled out, so it takes care of that for you. And whatever you told it to display, it displays. All right. So how do you learn more when you're in these notebooks? I talked about some of these things, use the little question mark, right? If you want to add a cell to your notebook and you've never used one before, at the top of your notebook, there's a toolbar, and you have this little plus button. You can go in any place where there's a cell, you click on it, you put plus, and it opens up an empty cell for you. And now you can start to interact with any of the data that's been created prior to that. So we had an object I made a few moments ago called more, and I can hit tab. So don't fret about adding a few cells to this, and using those empty spaces between some of the work that we're doing to experiment and to play. The other tools that I often use whenever I'm playing with new libraries and new examples, I use poor man debugging. So I print my variables a lot. What the heck is this? And let's go see what it is, right? Let's see the data on the screen. Or maybe I'll print a subset of the data. So if I have a list with 5 jillion records, maybe I'll print the first 10 just to get an idea of what's there. So I recommend as we go through and you're looking at example libraries or example graphs, print out some of the variables and see what is being fed into the graph. If you have something and you don't know what it is, I often use the type function to tell me what I'm looking at. So let's put one of these guys in here. So we had like, print x, and it says, hey, here's all those linearly spaced values that numpy produced. I can say, what is x? And it'll tell me it's a numpy array. Those kinds of things. And again, just change something and see what the changes happen. What's your question? Yeah, we'll get to that in a bit. When we get to the user guide is crazy awesome. It's actually very, very good. Total props to the folks who made Bokeh. All right. Let's talk a little bit about colors. Bokeh has rich support for colors. Again, the idea is to produce quality visualizations. So any of the 144, 147 named CSS colors are available to you. I have a link down here to take you to a list of those. So indigo, violet, green, gray, and the various spellings of gray, all those things work. If you want to use hex values, we saw a moment ago, hex values work just fine. If you're into doing transparency as part of it, you can append the optional alpha values at the end of hex, and it'll take care of that as well. So it understands 6-character and 8-character hex colors. If you wanted to feed 3 tuple integers for red, green, and blue, those values between 0 and 255, it handles that. And if you want to do 4 tuples to include the alpha, where your alpha is between 0 and 1, that's all good as well. All right. So for example, all right, I'm going to create a new graph. Linear space stuff, I make a copy of that. All right. This time, though, I'm going to add a title to my graph, right? So that my user understands what he's looking at. And in this case, I'm going to tell it that my x-axis type should be log. So I want to have a log graph, right? For those who didn't get along well with math, log graphs just mean that they grow funny, right? And I tell it my y-axis should go from 0.01 all the way up to 10 to the 22nd power. So it should go up pretty high. Now I'm going to tell it that I would like to produce a series of circles. I give it my x values and my y values. Again, I put my legend on. But this time I tell it my circle should be empty in the middle. Fill color should be none. So I'm going to have hollow circles instead of solid. My line color, I'm going to use that color name from the web of blue-violet. And I tell it these circles should be bigger than before. They should be like size 5. Next, I'm going to also do a line on this graph, and we'll say, okay, line color will be dark red, but my line width should be pretty narrow. I want a width of 2. Set line width to 2. All right. So let me make sure I execute these guys real quick. Bink, bink, bink. A couple things to note. When I made this particular item, and I made this particular item, in the background, a glyph was produced. A glyph is basically just the thing that gets drawn on your graph. It's got an identifier for it. If you go back and rerun one of these cells, it'll make a new glyph with a new identifier. All right? And we'll see a case of that and how that can mess you up. So I'm not recommending you do it now. Probably already have for 3/4 of the room. All right, let's make another one. This time, instead of circles and lines, we're going to make squares. Line dash will be set to solid. Legend, color, it's all good. Let's see what we got. Now, I talked about kind of how we can tweak the graph so it's better for the user. Right? I mentioned before that legend has various options, top left. We're going to put this legend on the center left side, but I'm going to change the font, make it Times. For that title that I created about 3 or 4 cells ago, I want to change that title. I want to set the font for it. I want to set the color of it. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and use a 3-tuple of RGB values. We'll set the font to be Courier in this case, because we're geeks, and we'll make it bold, right? But this graph, it's going to be maybe on a white background or something, so I want it to have, instead of being plain white, I want it to be a white smoke color. I did not know that that color existed on the web, but it does. There's white smoke. And it should be kind of grayish. It may not show up very well up here, but it hopefully shows up okay on your own machines. All right. And I execute and show, and there we go. And hopefully you see it's kind of a grayish color now. My legend is centered off the left. I've got squares, etc. And it's got this log over here. All right. Color palettes. So some of you may have used Seaborn, and that was mentioned earlier when we were talking to the audience. The principle behind Seaborn was matplotlib is very in the weeds in some cases, and it's hard to kind of get things set up. So what if we had kind of a layer that lays on top of that that allows us to do good design using harmonious colors and those kinds of things? So Bokeh takes into account some of those types of design principles. Again, the idea here is to help people do beautiful looking designs that put the focus in the right places. So Bokeh actually incorporates a series of palettes from a wide variety of sources. And they have essentially picked particular color values that are harmonious from very commonly used palettes, and I'll show you some of those in a bit. But how do you get to them? This is a palette that I'm going to use here in the next example. It's the purples palette, and something to understand about the palette. The palette is essentially a dictionary, and it is referenced by number. So this dictionary has a key of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. If I say I want to use palette number 3 out of the purples dictionary, it gives me a choice of 3 colors. If I want palette number 9, it gives me a choice of 9 colors. And it's already pre-designed or preset to show all of the colors that are there. So for example, I go into Bokeh palettes and I import purples. I'm going to go ahead and print purples 3 and purples 5. And I'm going to look at purples 5 and choose the very first color out of purples 5. And I'm going to use that for my line color. All right. And so we execute and we see what we get. There we go. So the palette number 3 off purples has these 3 colors. Palette number 5 has some related colors, but they're not exactly the same. All right. So if you have a graph and you want to use some, arrangement of purples, this is a way to get that. And I'll show you in a couple minutes some of the other palettes, etc., that are available to you. So let's add one more line to our graph. We set our line color a second ago to one of those purples. It was 75.6B11, so we're going to use that line color. We're going to use a function out of numpy to calculate the square root of x. We're going to make it a dashed and dotted line, and it'll be a width of 3. All right, so there you go. And notice it updated my legend for me on the fly. It's got a purplish color. All right, so there was a question. It was, hey, where do I find all this stuff? So let's go look at a few of those things. If you Google on the web, Bokeh user guide, it'll take you to this place. And there's a ton of data here, absolute crazy amount of data. They have a quick start guide. They have, getting yourself set up. They have some key concepts that would be important to cover, like what is a glyph, those kinds of things. They walk you through plotting with basic glyphs and making some high-level charts, etc. So Bokeh has kind of 3 levels. They have a charts library, a plots library, and a models library. And depending on how deeply into the weeds you want to get, you'll use one of those. Many of the things that we'll be using here come out of the plotting library and the charts library. And those are fairly high level. You can get to a statistical chart fast and easy without having to do a lot of poking and prodding. This is no longer accurate, this particular sentence. This actually points you to data shader and HoloViews instead of matplotlib and seaborn. But the user guide walks you through a bunch of the things we'll see, but in greater depth, like how do you add an annotation, or how do you change your layout, etc. Let's go see styling visual attributes. So we'll click on styling visual attributes. And if I scroll down on the left-hand side, you'll see that I can set certain visual properties like the fill or the line properties. You'll see that I can do things like setting borders and backgrounds and titles. I can adjust the axes and the labels and the boundaries of the axes, etc. There's a lot of detail here. Right. They mentioned palettes, so let's real quickly go into the palettes part, right? It gives you an example of how you might use one. There's a variety of them. If I want to know more details, I should be able to go to the Bokeh palettes page, and we'll see that. All right, so we'll go to Bokeh palettes. If you're into graphical design, all the color brewer palettes available to you, all the categorical D3 palettes are there, matplotlib palettes like Magma and Inferno are there, and some other palettes that are designed for folks who have potentially color deficiencies, and you need to be cognizant of usability for those folks. But I'm going to just scroll through these. You see there's a wide variety of these from various organizations and sources that have kind of standardized on various palettes, and there's a ton of them. Okay. All right. Now, I don't want to spend a lot more time on palettes. The gist of this conversation is this. The user guide is incredibly good. There's a lot of detail there. And as we go through it, I'm going to refer to various places where there's info in the user's guide. When you have a question, this is an absolutely fantastic resource to go to. A couple other places we'll look at, there's some example galleries of graphs that they've made, and there are a lot of examples inside the user guide as we go through it as well. All right, so next. Okay. So we're going to take a break here. I think this is probably a good place to take a break. We've been going now for about an hour and 20 minutes. I'll give you guys about 5 minutes, because I know you guys are going to take 10. So if you don't want to go take a break, that's fine too. You can stay. But I'll answer some questions while people are kind of moseying around. What's up, Mike?
Just so the download button only offers a PNG. Is there other formats to download, like SVG or some other kind of like vector formats to download this thing, to save it, to use it somewhere else? So if you go to the graph and you say download here, and this
the save button?
Save button only gives me a PNG.
Ah.
There's no option to say anything. It just downloads.
When you say, you can save the outputs, and I believe there is a mechanism to set it like programmatically. You write a line of code in your script.
And then you can have a different format.
I believe so. We'll have to look. Yeah, SVG would be crazy good. All right, let's go figure this out. trying to get internets through my phone, and my phone is not wanting to give me internets. What do you mean, good stuff? Oh, thank you. It's not letting me. It's not letting me. Dang it, I can't connect to my phone. What the crap? 440. Up there we go. Okay. Love you too, bud. So what is your status? Hanging in there. Did you guys get to the point where...
He helped me with getting the notebooks uploaded.
Where Bokeh.js is.
Bokeh.js is your hang up. Awesome.
How do you set that up locally?
That's a good question.
Mine was fine.
Now, once you've downloaded the Bokeh.js library, your browser should take care of it because it's a JavaScript library for your browser. And you shouldn't need a new one. Periodically, they update it and you want to go, your browser would just natively go and get more recent versions.
It's probably going to cache it.
It should be fine, yep. So,
It's not true for me because I already loaded this once and then I had quit out of this notebook, opened up another one, and now I'm still hung on loading.
maybe it downloaded it to your, were you in the virtual environment?
Oh, never mind, there it goes. It was lying.
It was lying.
actually done.
It was done. else's. So how's this going?
The pipeline suddenly opened up, and all of a sudden I started downloading. I timed out, and then all of a sudden it started catching up. I'm just sitting here watching paint dry.
Sweet. Well,
But
hopefully,
usually with paint I catch a buzz.
hopefully you'll
I
get
forgot we
somewhere.
installed VOC free paint.
So how are things going here? Everything all right? Okay, good. So how are things going back here? Progressing along. Okay, good. So how goes it so far?
Pretty good. Some problems with the internet, but otherwise.
Okay. I take no credit or blame for the internet. we're about ready to get started. You get plugged back into the screen. All right, so we'll do some fun and interesting plots, hopefully. We're going to go through these pretty quick, and as I said, some of the things we've already covered I'm not going to kind of repeat. We'll just highlight some of the newer things. We'll look at a scatter plot, we'll look at a histogram with probability density and cumulative density curves, and we'll look at a graph that has some interactive sliders to allow you to choose parameters that you want to have displayed on the graph. We will look at visualization tools and the types of tools we have, and we'll look at a geographical map where you take some latitude and longitude data and you put it onto a graph. All of these things that we're going to look at are available in the Bokeh library. What I've done here is I've added some commentary, I've broken them up in different ways, and I've said a few things. There's a couple places where I might have taken some stuff out of these particular graphs, just to simplify them so that we can focus on the new issues and not be overwhelmed by some certain things. Like the interactive slider graph. If you go look at the gallery, they show you a graph with 4 or 5 sliders. I'm going to show you a graph with 1 slider. Again, so we can kind of hone in on the things that are important and highlight the differences between what we've seen before. So there is some sample data available for you for your amusement. I'm going to caveat that. The sample data kind of comes in three different ways. There is a certain amount of sample data that just comes with Bokeh, and it's already pre-downloaded for you. It's small quantities of data. There are other much larger data sets available as well, and if you were to run, for example, the command bokeh.sampledata.download, they'll install. And then if you get into the server examples actually have kind of a third set of data. And you would download some of those independently for the servers. There are, in some cases, certain scripts that come with the server examples that you would download. All right. So let's start off with a scatter plot. Bokeh comes by default with some color data related to irises, and irises are these little flowers. They have petals, they have sepals, and the petals and sepals have different lengths and different widths. And they come with different colors. So from bokeh.sampledata.iris, we'll import the flower data set. That's going to come in, and it'll be a pandas data frame. Just so that we can get a sense of what the data looks like, I'm going to use some of those techniques I mentioned earlier where I'm going to print the type of object that I'm looking at, maybe how many records are in this object, maybe take a sample. Pandas data sets, if you run .sample on them, it'll give you a random sample of the data. So let's go do that. And we see that I got a pandas data frame, there's 150 records, and then my random sampling. So a couple things to note from the random sampling. Sepal length, sepal width, petal width, and then species. There are 3 types of irises that are represented in here: versicolor, virginica, and setosa. Don't ask me if that's pronounced correctly. And we're going to kind of try and see what this data really means, depending on what type of species we're looking at. So I'm going to start off by making a color map. Anytime I see setosa, I want a color of red. Anytime I say versicolor, I use green. This is just Python stuff. This isn't really Bokeh. I'm going to use a list comprehension to map the species to a color, and I'm going to create a list. And that list will be 150 records long. And essentially what will happen is I read through the data frame. If I see virginica, I give a color in my list. If I see setosa, I give a different color in my list. And so I'm going to ask Python to then tell me how many colors I made and give me like every 10th color. And so you see I've got a bunch of reds, a bunch of greens, and a bunch of blues. Again, that's not really Bokeh, that's just Python doing its thing. All right, so first off, we're going to set a title. It's going to be iris morphology. I'm going to provide a label for my x and my y axes. And in here, we see that I've got my figure P, I have my x-axis. There's a lot of things that hang off of attributes that hang off that x-axis. The label is just one of them. If I wanted to set the fonts for my label, I can do, or for my axes, I can do that as well. In this case, we just give it a name, petal length, petal width. When I go into a pandas data frame and I say, give me the column petal length and give me the column petal width, it's going to use that as x and y values. I made a list of colors. There's 150 of them. They should map quite nicely to all 150 rows in the data frame. The fill color is going to be the fill alpha, sorry, will be 0.2, so it's going to be kind of transparenty. And the circles will be size 10. And so we rendered the glyphs, and let's go look at our graph. And that's crazy awesome. Right? And so right off the bat, Setoses were red and Virginicas were blue. So we see there's a very definite difference in size of petal width and lengths for the various types of flowers, right? We still have the same standard tooltips over here. If I really want to zoom in on some of these, it looks like there's a little bit of overlap here. Let's kind of get more detail. And notice we can really get in here and start to see kind of where these things, these two different colors might overlap, or these two different species might overlap. Notice as we zoom in, it automatically expands my axes on the left-hand side as my zoom increases. Now, when I go into the next few examples, I'm going to follow a workflow. I will break down each of the examples that are online into a workflow. And the workflow that I tend to suggest is as follows. Start by importing your libraries, generate just your figure and maybe some of the attributes of your figure, your title, etc. Create or load your data and your enrichments. Do as much of that as you can kind of in one spot, so that way you can focus on that part of the problem. Then start to generate your glyphs. Typically, you can't generate the glyphs if you don't have the data to put into it, right? Once your glyphs are generated, go about the process of fine-tuning them. Change the fonts and set all the annotations. If you want to have an interaction, and we'll see a few of those, you can add those at this point. And then you generate your outputs. And your outputs could be in the notebook like we're going to show here, or you could output to an HTML file or to a JSON file, those kinds of things, right? Now, for simple graphs, maybe not all of these steps are critical, or maybe you don't break them out concretely. Maybe if you have a very sophisticated kind of server app, maybe this is not quite enough. You want to break it down a little more. But this is just a starting point. And if you follow this model, you'll get pretty far. So let's look at a histogram. I start off with my imports. We'll import numpy, scipy, and Bokeh. From the layouts portion of Bokeh, we're going to import this thing called a grid plot. So we'll see that later. Okay. I create my figure. I give it a title. This case, I'm going to tell it I only want to use essentially the save. And I tell it that I want the background fill color to be white smoke again. All right. So let's run this. Nothing happens there. And I've created a figure, right? Again, every object in Bokeh has its own unique identifier. So I've got a figure. Now I need to start doing stuff with it. We looked earlier at using kind of the question mark to figure out what we have and get some help about it. So if I type H question mark, and we saw this before. We saw that you could look at it and says, hey, there's some details about figures. Great. But there's a nuance down here at the bottom. And it says, in addition to all the Bokeh model property attributes documented below, the figure initializer also accepts some following options, but then it kind of dies, and it doesn't show you all those parts and pieces. With IPython, if you have an object and you ask for essentially the help documentation, you can do that with the question mark. If the item is written in Python and you want to see the source code, you can use 2 question marks. So we'll do that. And now we're actually going to look at the source, and you see there's a little place here that says source. That initial doc string is right there at the top, and that's all good. But we could potentially start to scroll down, and you'll see that there are a number of objects in here that they reference, like arc and asterisks and things like that. These are all things that you can put onto a figure. The circle graph is in here, etc. So even if you don't have access to the internet, you can start to kind of scroll through a figure and see what kind of things could I overlay onto a figure. I want to overlay a line or cross, and maybe you don't remember the exact name, but this might be an easy way to kind of refresh your memory. All right, so just be aware that you can see the source code with the double question mark. And sometimes that gives you something if a single question mark lets you down. All right, so let's see. It's picking back up from where we left off. We've got a figure. I didn't scroll down far enough, but one of the options for things you can put onto a figure is a histogram. So we're going to end up putting a histogram together. We're going to use a tool in NumPy that does this for you, gives you the data at least. I'm going to start off by creating kind of the midpoint and the standard deviation for a nice kind of bell curve. We're going to look for some random samples from a normal distribution, again using NumPy. I'm not going to go into the details of how that works, but I'm going to get 1,000 random samples associated with a normal curve. And I'm going to ask NumPy to create kind of the data for a histogram. And it's going to create two outputs, something called hist and something called edges. So what the hist is going to be is this array of y values for my histogram points, the tops essentially of all of my vertical bars. And the edges are going to be essentially what you would call the sides of each of those bars. So if you had a bunch of vertical bars, where would I start the first bar and end the first bar? And where would the second bar start and end, etc. In this case, I told it that I want 50 bins, which means I'm going to get 50 items in the histogram data and 51 edges, because we start on one side and then work to the other side, right? So there's going to have one extra value, so you can get that extra edge. We create some x values, 1,000 of them between -2 and 2. Do not worry about all of this crazy math. We're going to skip right over that. Just gives me values that I can plot curves. It's going to be cool. And trust me on that one. All right. This is, again, just straight Python. I wanted to see, what does this data look like? What do I actually have here? So we printed a few of these things out. I generally took small samples of each of them. So these are data that's measured, and these are the histogram values. And notice I have 50 histogram values, and I got 51 edge values. And these are the points that will be used to generate my probability distributions and cumulative distributions, etc. All right. But before we can draw these rectangles on my histogram, we need to know a tool that we're going to use to do that with. And in this case, each of those little rectangles is going to be used, or is going to use the quad object to create an individual rectangle. So what I'd like you to do for your experience points is use the question mark function and figure out for the quad function that hangs off of my f or my h figure. Tell me what is its default fill color. Tell me what does the alpha characteristic do, and how is the alpha characteristic different than line alpha? So start to explore this. If you have any problems, put up your little red flags. And when you get done answering those 3 questions, put up your red flags. When you're done, put up your green flags. Excellent. See, that was a test for you, to see if you guys would notice that.
Fill alpha to a value and line alpha and alpha, which is supposed to set everything to a different value. Who's winning?
Who wins?
Because if alpha sets all the alphas, but maybe these detailed override the alpha then?
I haven't tried it. We should try it.
We try. That's what I would suspect, because alpha is the most basic one.
Mhm.
Rather than the more specific, they should override alpha. That's I would have.
That is how I would think someone would program it if they were wise and smart. Yeah. But you could try it. You could set an alpha of like 0.01, and then for a particular line, set the fill line or put the line alpha. Put the line alpha for that line to be 0.9. I'd be curious to see what you get.
Can I set it later on? Because now everything set in the constructor. Can I set it later as a set kind of thing, like in matplotlib? Can I change it later on once I've created it?
So, like in this case, I'm setting the alpha right here when I'm making.
But if you do it later on, you want to change it in the object?
Okay, so.
Doesn't seem to have a method. I wouldn't need many to make an instance.
So for example, in h quad, if I set alpha equal to be 0.9, and then I were to say line alpha equals something different.
But it doesn't over alpha. At least this one doesn't understand. I executed the cell. It doesn't understand. I made an instance of this quad.
I guess what I mean is, in this same function, if you put a comma and put like line alpha.
Yeah, I understand. That's in the constructor.
Yeah.
But I want to see if I can do it later. If I change my mind later on. Because it doesn't seem to have an attribute alpha. So I execute the cell. Now Q exists. Because Q is now this thing. And if I say dot tab, it should show me alpha, but it doesn't. There's also no line.
So
Line alpha. So I thought, isn't it Q an instance of a quad? Looks like.
it should be an instance of Q. Well, it's a glyph renderer.
It's a glyph render instance.
Yes.
So it's the instance of a class. And then
So can we override?
to have it have something like this?
Yep.
So there's no alpha in there. Probably there's maybe a property values. Okay, that could be something. Property values. So you probably not to mess around with it, because this is.
You can just re-execute the cell.
Yeah, of course you can. But if you like it in a program, like in a loop, you want to change the code, something like this, then you can.
Never tried this.
Yeah. Because of course they do animations, so that would be something for an animation you need to change.
Absolutely.
The color.
Change it over time, right?
From red to hot to blue to cold or something. That would make sense. That obviously is not the way to do it.
Now, this can be set to a variable, so you can feed a variable into it. So if you wanted to run
Well, this
the
is
quad
a
function,
constructor,
yeah, how do we
maybe
change
an
it?
instance, but then after the fact, then the instance should have properties you can change.
Yeah.
Maybe there is a special function to change it or something. No.
There might be a function that allows you to access it, like setAtter or something like that.
Yeah. Because if I say alpha,
Whoop.
maybe it doesn't show up because it's dynamic.
I don't know.
No, it doesn't make sense.
All right, it's a bunch of green things. I don't see any red things. All right. So, what is the default fill color? Gray. Excellent. And what does the characteristic alpha do? Sets the alpha value for what? Everything. And how does that contrast with line alpha? Line only affects the line. So Mike and I were having a conversation over here is what is the precedence? If I set alpha and then I try and set line alpha, does line alpha override alpha or is it vice versa? And I don't know. We'll have to experiment with that. All right. So I'm going to make a quad object. In this case, I set 4 key characteristics. I set the top of each of those rectangles using the histogram values that numpy gave me. I want all these to start at the bottom, so I set the value for the bottom to be 0. And remember, there's 51 edges, but there's only 50 bins. So I need all the edges on the left side, all the edges on the right side. So I select all the edges, and I have it step by 1, or -1, to get my left edges. I do a fill color of yellow, a line color of orange, set my alpha there. All right. Now I want to make those probability distribution curves. So I set a line to appear on my figure. I create a legend. I make the alpha -7, I tell it where to put this stuff, and I give a label to my x-axis and y-axes, and then we go. All right, none of those things are really new. And there we go. And there you go. All right. Sure. That was the same thing that Mike and I were looking at. How do you get back? Or how do you programmatically change it over time? Like, could I change the alpha over time, maybe to make a dynamic graph to say, let's make it fade in or fade out over time in a for loop or something. And we have not yet figured out how to programmatically query for what it is or to set it on the fly. So we'll have to figure that out. And by figure that out, means, I don't know, go home and play. One thing to say about this library, this is an amazingly powerful library. So I've used it in the past, and I spent a lot of time looking at this thing, and getting ready for today's conversation. And every time I sit down and look at it with fresh eyes, I'm just amazed by how deeply into the weeds you can get into setting various characteristics, and how sophisticated. And when we get into the sample library and you see all the types of graphs that you can make, etc., you'll be pretty amazed. All right, so that's our graph. We got the title. We've got all the colors that we chose. Notice our toolbar, we tweaked this. We have a single object instead of kind of the defaults that normally show up, so we overrode those. We've got x-axis labels. And these things, you can arrange these in various ways so that they're tilted and horizontal, vertical, etc. There's a lot of nuances here that you can change. And we'll see some good examples as we go through. All right. Next example. In this case, I'm going to import some new items from the library that we haven't seen before. I'm going to import row object. I'm going to import a widget box object. And we'll go into a lot more detail later on in the conversation about those guys. I'm going to import custom JavaScript library or a function. I'm going to import a slider function and a thing called column data source. So we're going to look at a bunch of new things here. What I would like for you to do is try and figure out, if you can, what we're going to get out of custom JS and slider. I've imported these things. I don't know what they do. I've never used them before, right? So how would you go about figuring out what custom JS and what slider do? JS. Maybe that works. I'm going to go on the web and I'm going to try and hunt these down on the Bokeh documentation, because as I look at these little question mark responsey things, this seems kind of limited in what it can do for me. So custom.js. I'm going to do a little bit of search. So I used the question mark, and I got very little back. Hey, custom.js allows you to do JavaScript something. I don't know. When I went into the Bokeh library and I said, hey, I'm in the user guide, let me do a search on custom.js, I get this page back. And if you look at the scroll bar on this thing, as I kind of scroll up and down, there's a lot of content here. And you also notice as I scroll down through this thing, there are lots and lots of graphs embedded in these. And for just about every graph, they give you the graph and they give you the code that made that graph. And you can go in and you can actually play with all of these things, and you can see the various components and what it's doing and how it's interacting with stuff, right? So the user guide is chock full of living, breathing examples of how to use these types of tools and what you can expect out of them. So I mentioned that the user guide is really good. It legit is really good. All right. So if the question mark fails you, not all is lost. All right. So we're going to start off now. We did our imports a minute ago. We're going to do our figure generation. Notice here I set the plot width. I want it to be 400 pixels wide by 400 pixels high. So we set the plot width and height. I set my y range to go from -10 up to 10. Going to use numpy to create a series of values. I want them to go from 0 to 10. I want there to be 500 of them. And for the y values, the actual numbers that will fit on the y-axis, I used numpy's sign function. And I create a column data source. A column data source takes something that ostensibly has columns in it, or has something that could be considered column-like, and allows you to create essentially a reference library that you can then refer back to based on those column names. You can feed it dictionaries, and each key would be the name of a column. You can feed it pandas data frames, and each column then becomes a component in here. So in this case, I'm making a very simple data source. It's a dictionary. The X column has all my X values. The Y column has all my Y values. And I can then refer to it. So how do I refer to this thing? I can tell my line plot that my source of data should be this columnar table that I've created. And I want to refer to the two columns called X and Y. Notice I refer to them as strings, much like you would a key in a dictionary. Your data source can have multiple columns in it. It doesn't have to be just two, and we'll see an example later with like 3 or 4 different columns in it. So I make my line graph. I use a column from my source for the Y values, a column from my source for the X values. I set the line width, the line alpha. It's all good. All right. And I use that custom.js library. And I tell it that for the arguments that go into this, we're going to refer to those source tables, right? And this is all straight JavaScript. I'm not a JavaScript guy, okay? You are on your own in terms of making JavaScript. Essentially, we read in some of the source data. We are going to assign an amplitude value for our graph to show how high the graph should go. Our X values are going to come out of the X column and the Y column of the data. And we're going to have this complicated mathematical formula that does stuff and changes Y's based on amplitudes that you tell it. And when my slider changes, the JavaScript will get updated based on the current setting of the slider, and it will essentially change my Y values kind of on the fly. I create a slider object, and I tell it to use this JavaScript callback to help with calculating some of the values. I tell it my slider should start at 0.1 and go up to 10. The initial value I want it to start off would be 1, and the steps should be 0.1. I want to lay this out so my slider is next to my graph. So I use my row object, and I say put my plot first, and then put a widget box to the right-hand side and put my amplitude slider. I could have just put the slider. This graph was taken from one online, and they actually had 4 sliders on the screen, so they used a widget box to kind of put them all together. When I stripped out the other 3, I just left the widget box. And we'll see an example of widget box again. All right, so some crazy JavaScript. Can't say that I understand it. It does magic. And let's make our graph. And horrible things happened. Did I not read in some of my data somewhere? Make that go away. There we go. Okay. I must have accidentally skipped one of my cells to produce the data. So I've got some sort of kind of sine wave curvish thing. Got the standard tools. I've got -10 up to 10. That's the range for my y values. And I've got this amplitude. It's set at 1, which is what we asked it to be set at. And it can move by 0.1. So every time I slide it along, it creeps up by 0.1. And as I slide it, my graph changes in real time. If you go look at the example that's online in the Bokeh library, the gallery. Why am I typing in all caps? Okay, gallery. Let's go see if we can find this example. And it could take a while to load. Let's see. Where is it? There we go. This one's got 4 different types of sliders. One for phase shifting, one for assigning an offset up or down, one to change the frequency. And notice, I can use any one of these sliders. They're all independent, etc. All of these sliders will be saved inside that same widget box. So he's got the widget box, and he lists all the sliders in the order that he wants them to show up. Okay. There was a couple of extra lines of code in here in the JavaScript to change the frequency values, the value of k based on whatever the slider provides it as a frequency value or a phase value. And then there's some other magic down here to create a slider object for each of these and to call back appropriately when needed to change values in the JavaScript to calculate what the new y value should be. All right. So a lot of functionality there. All right. We saw that there's a default set of visualization tools that go in your toolbar. You saw that we could strip some of those out and get rid of them. Let's take a look at adding some new ones. All right. So we go in, we import our stuff. That's all awesome and magic. We're going to generate a bunch of random numbers. The numpy random function makes numbers between 0 and 1. I want 4,000 of these, so I'll have 4,000 x values, 4,000 y values. And I'm going to set some radii, for a bunch of circles. So I'll make 4,000 various radii. And I'll let you read all this. This is just some fancy way of making more hex numbers. All right, so we're going to skip that. Notice, in this case, when I create my figure, I can tell it right off the bat which tools to use. And it's fairly customary to use kind of this format. All the tools have a simple name, crosshair, hover, pan, wheel. And you can look those up in the documentation. All of the tools also have a callable function name. And in the callable function name, you can actually provide certain attributes for those functions to make these tools do more magic for you. We're not going to go into the depths of that. I just want you to know that that exists. But if you just want to take the default values and the default functionality of these tools, you just put them all in a single string with commas, and it will add each of these tools to your graph. So let's see what we've got. We've got crosshair, hover, pan. The wheel zoom, they have a zoom in and zoom out button. You should always put both. They have a box zoom, undo, redo. They have tap, which allows you to tap on the graph either with a mouse or if it's a touch screen with your finger. They have the save button and they have box select, right? So we'll just go ahead and run that. Why did it not like that? Name radii. I didn't run that one. All right, so let's run that. Okay. And now you see we've got a huge selection of these guys. So let's take a look at some of these tools. A couple things. By default, the pan was selected. It's blue. The tap is blue. Crosshairs is blue. And this little hover tool is blue. Those are active tools. I can turn them on, turn them off. If you notice, there is a black crosshairs in the middle of the screen right now. As soon as it covers over or crosses over the boundary for one of those circles, a hover tooltip will show up and it'll give you some details about where that crosshair is centered. So right now it happens to be centered over 2 overlapping circles. So it's in kind of the union of those, or the intersection of those 2 circles, right? In the code, we asked it to show me the index, what row that circle was in the data, and give me kind of the X and Y value, and then give me the position on the canvas itself. All right. And as I scroll around, it takes me to the various things. If there's a lot of overlap, I might see 3 or 4 things show up in my hover tip. I can turn that off if that's a distraction. So now it's off. If the crosshairs are a problem, you can turn those off, right? If I want to select an item, I can click on it, and it selects it. Notice in this case, when I quote-unquote selected it, everything else got kind of grayed out into this bluish color. If I don't want the tap functionality on, I just turn it off. Okay. If I want to select certain things, I can use box select, and we can highlight just the ones we care about. We're going to go and zoom in now. When I zoom, if you watch the screen closely, you'll see that it zooms the stuff out, and then it redraws what's there. And you'll start to see potentially more details showing up kind of in between the spaces. There we go. Keep going. Right. So as I dive deeper into my data, some of the things that might not have been easily visible before start to become apparent. And that's part of the idea of Bokeh. And I'm going to turn the hover tool back on. And notice as I go into these places where there's a lot of overlap, I get more of these tooltips. When I go to a place where there's less overlap, the tooltips start to diminish a bit. Okay? All right. So that's that. Let's go take a look at it. You can. All right. I think we do a little bit where in the geographical sample. So wait for a few minutes and we'll look at the geography one, and we'll see where we look at changing that. Okay. All right. For your experience points, what I'd like you to do is scroll up to the previous thing, and I want you to add an additional pan tool to the tools string and then execute that code. You're going to get a warning, and I want you to consider what the warning means. Look at your toolbar anyway to see what really happened, and then go ahead and take the pan tool out. And then I want you to add the poly select and the lasso select to your tools strings. Make sure you spell them the right way, and just see what you get. And play with the lasso tool or play with the poly tool. When you're done with those things, put your little green flags up.
Somebody asked about introspecting the line color and fill color and stuff.
Sure.
I figured out how to do that.
Sweet. What'd you get?
So when you make the object gives you back a reference, so you want to bind it to a name. So I imaginatively use the name ref for the reference.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we introspect it, we see ref.glyph.fillColor is the fill color. And I verified I can poke a new value into it and replot and change that. So up here I made it blue, down here I changed it back to orange, and it plots in orange.
You can actually update it. You can actually update it without binding it at the beginning. If you do h.renders, it'll show you everything that you've appended to the plot figure object. And then there's an update method that looks like it's designed to do that.
H dot what?
h.renders. It's an attribute, not a...
It's an attribute.
That'll list all of the glyphs that you've added to it, and then that's a list, and you can select from the list the particular glyph you want to do.
Right, but it's probably easier to save a reference to it at the time you make it than you know which one it is.
But if you have it, if you want to go back.
Cool. Sweet. Thank you, guys. Hey, Mike. So one of the guys back here was looking at that problem.
Yeah, they found it. It's alpha. It has a dot glyph. Mm-hmm. The dot glyph has a fill alpha and a fill things. It doesn't have the alpha, which is kind of a convenience thing, but it has a fill alpha and a fill or whatever the other alpha. I found it.
So he put like ref equals h.quad, and then the ref object has all of these dots, and you can change them on the fly.
Yeah,
so what did you do?
So I'm in here.
Yeah.
I didn't see the effect of alpha, so I'm playing around with it. But I just
So you got
H,
that. Yep.
Q, and then Q the glyph, and then
Yep. That's what they did. Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
And it doesn't have alpha, but it has a Q glyph dot. It has a line
So you got a line alpha.
and it has a fill alpha, but doesn't have an alpha. So it doesn't have this, because the alpha seems like just a convenient thing to set
Sure.
everything.
Yeah.
So there's no alpha.
Yep.
This alpha doesn't apply. It's not
And that was the description that was in the help documentation, that alpha was like this helper, right?
Yeah.
It's a convenience.
So, I tried to play around with it, but I couldn't see the effect. I set the color to blue to show. So you can see the blue one is what I'm setting here. But if I play around with those alphas, I don't see any difference.
Oh. When you run one of these graphs and then you add more stuff to it, it doesn't delete whatever was there. You just keep laying right on top of the figure. You have to generate the figure from scratch.
Oh, okay.
So if you go up like 2 cells and you regenerate the figure,
Okay, so I have to do this.
And
I have
then-
to rerun this cell here.
whichever one had the figure generation in it, right here.
This one. So probably
Yeah.
if I just copy this one into the cell, then it should work.
Should. All right, cool. So let's take a look. I'm going to go up here and I'm going to add another pan to the front of this. And what did we get? Okay, we get a warning. It says, hey, you've tried to put more than one tool in there. It doesn't kill anything, it doesn't crash your system, but it does put a second pan in there. So some wonkiness can happen if you're not careful. And what happens when we add a lasso select? So select, boom. All right, we get this nice little lasso over here on the right side. I'm going to turn this craziness off, make that go away. All right, so lasso select. And it lets you do kind of little drawy things, blah, blah, blah. One coolness, if you wanted to do some selection and then you wanted to start someplace else and do another one, you can continue to add selection by using the shift key. So I'm going to go down in this corner, press shift, and I'm going to do a little lasso selection down in this lower corner, and there we go. So multiple levels of selection can be done using the shift key. Similar thing happens with the poly. We're not going to do that in the interest of time. All right, so let's talk about geographical maps. For here, if you run the download function, it'll download some data sets for you. They've got some movie databases. They've got some geographical databases. I think there's some data from Gapminder. If you've watched the talk by Hans on YouTube, variety of census kind of data, etc. So there's a wide variety of things. In my case, I've already got it downloaded. I'm not going to run this cell because it's going to start downloading stuff. In terms of my imports, though, I'm going to import column data source again to kind of make that columnar table of data. We're going to import the hover tool and log color mapper to help us out with a few things. We're going to use the Viridis 6 palette off of our Bokeh palettes, and we're going to do standard figure and output notebook. And then I really care in this case about the unemployment data that we have and the US county data. So we're going to import those guys as well. All right, there we go. I'm going to go ahead and generate my figure. I put a title on it. I have a set number of tools I'm going to use. And I'm going to turn off the x-axis and y-axis. I don't want to see them on this particular style of graph. It's going to be a map of Texas, so they're not really going to be pertinent. And in this case, Bokeh always puts grids on. I don't want the grid to be there, so I'm going to set the color to none, right? So there we go. And I like to know what my data looks like. So we're going to look at the first 20 keys from the county's data, and we're going to see that it's a bunch of tuples. In this case, the first number is going to be a 48. The second number is going to be some odd number, 1, 3, 5, 7. And then in addition, I'm going to look at just one of those counties. I'm going to look at county number 48,3, and we'll see what that looks like. So we see there's a bunch of these identifiers for various counties, and when I look at just the data for one of them, we see that it gives me a bunch of latitude values. It's going to give me some longitude values somewhere in there. And it's going to give me a detailed name, which is Andrews County, Texas. It's going to give me a state. And then it's going to give me the generic name of the county, which is just Andrews, right? So that's what my data looks like. For the unemployment records that I've imported, I want to look at the keys and the values. If the key is equal to 48, because that's the counties that we're, or the state that we're looking at, I want to print out and see what those results look like. So let's go do that. And we see that for all of the counties with designators starting with 48, we see some degree of unemployment value. And all this stuff's going to get munged together. All right, so we've got data. Great. I generated a palette earlier. Let's go look at that one more time. I imported just the Viridis 6 palette, right? And in this case, it's a list. That's all it is. It's a list with a bunch of hex values. So I'm going to reverse that list, and we're going to swap the order. No big deal there. I'm going to use some generator or some list comprehensions and those kinds of things to parse through the data. Go through all my counties. If the county state is equal to Texas, save off the code in the county. Go look in all of my counties and capture the longitude and latitudes for Texas. Get the county name for each of the counties that are in Texas, and then go pull out just the unemployment data for the various counties associated with Texas. All right. Then I have this thing called a log color mapper. Again, log, if you're not into math, don't let that scare you. It essentially breaks out values, and it will take a series of colors in my palette, and it will map those colors against a set of log values starting at a low range going up to a high range, right? So as things get really close to the high range, the numbers change very dramatically, and or the colors will start to change dramatically. In this case, the palette doesn't have very many colors, so it's not going to make much difference. But the point of this is, in any case where on this map the unemployment is significantly higher than kind of the average-ish, you're going to see dramatic kind of spikes in color, so to highlight those guys. So we have a tool called a log color mapper. I'll let you research exactly how it works. And they have some example write-ups of how it's working in the background. So we're going to make a column data source. We're going to have 4 columns in it. We're going to have all of my X values for my counties, all my Y values. We'll have all the county names, and then we'll have the unemployment rates. So I'm going to have four columns in my table, essentially. We're going to generate a bunch of patches. Each of these patches is based on and patches is a function in Bokeh to create kind of shapes, potentially shapes of unusual layout. They're not quads or squares. So it's going to take all of the x and y values, and it's going to draw these little patches, right? I tell it that I'm going to use particular fill colors. It's going to grab some data from my color mapper to help do that. It's going to set we're going to set the alpha, etc. All right, so let's go look at the hover tool now. There's a question earlier about tooltips. So I'm going to use the tooltip function, and I'm going to set a policy that the tooltip should follow the mouse. The tooltip, I can define the things that I want it to show. So in this case, I'm going to set it to have the word name, and next to that, I'm going to use a name value. In this case, it's going to take the values out of the name column. That's what the little ampersand means, right? We're going to set an unemployment rate, and then we're going to get a Latin long. And I think the experience, yep, all right. Let me run these things, make sure I execute the code, and we'll see what we get. Boop. And do, and do. All right. So I have a graph of Texas. I have a little crosshair that follows my mouse. And as I go look at various counties, you'll see, for example, I'm in Culberson County right now, and the unemployment rate is 4.5. It shows me my latitude and longitude. If I go look at this yellow one up here, the unemployment rate was 3. I go look at this dark one over here, the unemployment rate is 15.9. So if you have geographical data, you can create patches like this to represent, a city, maybe the blocks or the areas of a town. Any place where you know the geographical boundaries or something, you can set up this type of thing. Now, your experience points thing is to get on the internets and go to the Bokeh user guide and look up hover tool and tool tips and figure out what that syntax means. I gave you a hint that the @ name looks for a particular type of data. What does the $ next to the X's mean? Right? What other options do you have for getting data in? So get on the internets and go look for the syntax for generating tooltips, praying, of course, that the internets cooperate with us. And when you get done, put your little green flags up. So how's it going? Did you get anything installed?
Yeah, it
Finally relented.
just as your TA came by.
Gotcha. What happened there? Ouch.
But
Was there a mechanism to solve it?
yeah, you can solve them on 3.6 by running the certificates command,
Okay.
which didn't work for Conda because I think I'm already in the virtual environment, so it doesn't propagate.
Outside the virtual environment.
Yes, because if you run this, you're outside of
Sure.
Conda. But then I just added this snippet into the requesting into the notebook, and
It worked okay?
Yeah.
Jeez. That's awesome. Yeah. Huh. run into it before. How are things going? It's not done?
It's stuck at 82.10%.
Oh, crap.
Is there a way to stop the execution?
Just rerun the cell. Yeah. Rerun the cell.
I'm getting stars.
So if you need to restart your kernel, you can go to kernel, and you can go to just restart, and it'll turn off Python and turn it back on, and try and give it a second go. You'll have to go to the various cells and execute the cells that you care about. Did it lock up completely? If it has locked up completely, you can go back to your Jupyter Notebook server and kill the server and start over from scratch. So you get into your command line, and your server will be running on your command line.
Interrupt the kernel.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be working, is it? Interrupting. Can you restart it? Okay. Restart. Can we execute that code? Mm-hmm. 34%. You have no love, man.
I know. Weak Wi-Fi.
How's it going?
Right.
Great.
I'm having some issues importing, because I guess I start fresh with a new environment. Just comes the stuff I had. Is your code using perhaps a later version?
I do not know. When I told it to install, it basically grabs the latest and greatest version of Bokeh, so I'm not sure what version you might have. Yeah, if you did an upgrade or an update, it may help. Bokeh is under extremely active development. They are making changes daily. So now they have release cycles, obviously. They don't change it every day, but the folks at Bokeh are regularly making upgrades and changes. So how's things going? Any luck back here? Good, good. How about you, James? Good, okay. Finally all caught up. That's a good place to be. Awesome. Being caught up's overrated. All right. So let's see. Go to the interwebs. And let's see. Tooltip. Give it a chance to do its thinking. Configuring plot tools. And see if that gives me any love. Control F for tooltip. And custom tooltip. All right. All right. So with the hover tool, if you have a column of data that you want to have displayed where as it's moving around, it'll pull the right value out of the column, you can start it with an ampersand. If you have a field name, particular known fields, you can start those with the $sign. For example, commonly used in in Bokeh is the x and y values. So if you put a $ in front of an x, it'll automatically display the x coordinate under the mouse position. If you have x values, that might be slightly different. All right. And then they've got, another good example of setting up some tooltips. They show like 6 different variations, and they show kind of this sample over here. They show you how to identify colors, and they give you some mechanisms to show the fill color as well as kind of the outline, etc. So there's a lot of good stuff here, right? All right, so I'm sorry. Go back. Let's go back. Doop. All right. So I went to the documentation, and I went to the search box, and I typed in just tooltips. And it brought me to this page, and, Google search, right? Hover tool pops up a tooltip div wherever the cursor is placed over the glyph. So I'm like, okay, let me go look at that, and I clicked on it. And then I just used Control F, right, to try and find where this thing might be on the page. And I noticed that a couple of the options on the left side, these are the first tool references where, hey, basic tooltips and custom tooltips. They have very good kind of table of contents in the user guide. All the things that you care about, in many cases, are actually represented in their own little kind of subsection. So they do a good job of pointing you in the right directions. And then I just clicked on one of those to take me there. I scrolled up a little bit to see more about the hover tool, and then it showed me the basic tooltips. Did that help? Sweet. All right. Next. So let's talk a little bit about, why doesn't that work? There are occasions where your little question mark doesn't work. There's going to be certain functions in here that don't necessarily have help documentation. The Bokeh developers are fantastic. I'll talk more about them in a little bit. But, not everything is completely fleshed out, right? They are a large project. It is under very heavy development. There's a lot of activity going on in the developer space for Bokeh. So not everything is as fleshed out as maybe we want, right? So if they don't have doc strings built in, read the manual, Google for it, post a question to Stack Overflow. The Bokeh GitHub account has, a place to put issues. You're like, hey, I noticed this function doesn't have something. You can post an issue. If you're feeling really ambitious, you can create a fix yourself, and you can submit that as a patch to the Bokeh people. They would love you, right? And you'll get your 15 minutes of fame. If you're like, wow, I would love to help Bokeh be a better tool. How do I get involved in open source contributions? Well, you can come see us on Sunday. We're going to have a workshop all about that. All right. One of the other problems that I ran into, besides not having help, was when I executed certain cells multiple times, some things happened, and I wasn't expecting them. So sometimes your science depends upon some iterative thinking and iterative processing. You're like, wow, what if I change this? What if I tweak that? What if I manipulate this variable in some way? And so you might be tempted to write your code, show your graph. Oh, tweak the code, show the graph. Tweak the code, show your graph. And you can get some strange results. This first showed up for me when I was looking at the histogram. When you go look at the example histogram online, they use completely different colors than what I used. I used like red and yellow and orange, and they used something different. I didn't like it. So I kept changing the colors to try and make the colors come out the way I wanted, and I kept tweaking and running the same graph. And what I was doing, unbeknownst to myself, was laying over on top of each other multiple glyphs on the same figure. So I had, for example, made a line that was like 8 pixels wide, and I wanted it to be 4 pixels wide. So I was laying a 4 pixel wide line on top of an 8 pixel wide line, but they were the same color, so I couldn't see the 4 pixel wide line. I'm like, why isn't this changing? This is broken. These people are horrible. How could they do this to me? I have a tutorial to deliver. So let's see how this works. We're going to go in, we'll execute this. We make a figure, right? So we got a random figure. And for your experience points, we go in and we execute this once. And we're going to just go look at it. Okay. We're going to execute it again. Now this thing actually calls up a random choice of color. So you don't have to change anything. You don't have to tweak it. It'll automatically tweak it for you. That's why I use the choice. So it's going to change the line color every time I do this. So I'm going to execute it one more time. We'll see that the glyph ID is going to change when I execute this a second time. Got a new glyph ID. And when I show my notebook, we'll see now I've got 2 lines, which is not what I wanted. I actually wanted a single line with maybe a different color. So now I've got this kind of corrupted thing where I've got more data than I cared to have. And so I kept doing this a bunch of times, and now I have lots of stuff, right? And so chaos erupted, and I was crying, there was weeping, gnashing of teeth. All right. So be cautious when you go tweak your stuff. And especially if one thing overlays another, it may be very difficult to see. This is an obvious example of, wow, I can see what happened here. But when I had a thin line on a fat line, that just didn't work out. All right. So be aware of that. We're going to talk about servers. I was running the servers, or a server, and it got very wonky. I had some drop-down menus, and I asked it to change some values in the drop-down menus, and the server kind of hung up halfway through, and I could not get it to jumpstart itself and go back to normal. I was unable to figure out why, and this happened about 5 or 6 times. When we get to the server place, I'll show you what I did, and we'll see what happened. So something about changing my data sources and feeding that into the server, something got a little weird. But again, I never could figure out why. I was trying to run the code for the servers, and there were some instructions in certain examples for the servers. And the instructions varied a little bit depending on whether you're using the user guide, or if you were reading the code that comes with the server. They have like a main.py file. So I'm reading the main.py, and I'm reading the server user guide, and the instructions were just a little bit off, so it took an inordinate amount of time for me to figure out how to make the server code run. So that was a bit frustrating. Internet's access was required, and a couple of folks ran into this. So when you first do this, sometimes you need to get a copy of the Bokeh.js libraries, and they're kept online, and you can go get the latest and greatest JavaScript library, and it's all good, unless you can't get to the internet, in which case it's all bad. When you fill out the survey on this class, I am not accountable for the Wi-Fi. Okay, just saying. There are mechanisms, though, if you need to host your JavaScript code on a particular server. Like maybe you're in some sort of an environment where you don't have access to the outside world for various reasons, whether they be security or it's a proprietary network, and you're doing research on it and you don't want it to leak out, etc. There are ways to host the JavaScript libraries. This is a problem that's solved, like with Bootstrap.js and things like that. You can host the libraries themselves on your network so you can get access to them. That's outside the scope of this class. I'll let you guys figure that out. Output file, you're killing me. So just like updating your figures can lead to some heartache, the output file led to a great deal of heartache for me. You notice in every case we've been outputting to our notebooks, and that was on purpose. Originally I kind of had it doing some things where let's output the notebook and have the graph in the notebook, but let's also make an HTML file that we could give to our boss or somebody who is not computer literate. And we don't want them playing with Jupyter notebooks. The output file, once you have initiated an output file function call, there is something about it, and it just hangs around in the background. And every time you execute the show command, it will try and output to that output file, even if you're started on a new function or started on a new figure. So let's take a look. I'm going to, we made a figure a few minutes ago. It was figure P, and it had all those random colored lines on it, right? So I'm going to import the output file, and I'm going to say I want all my results stored at results.html, and I want to show P And when I run this, it's going to make a very nice output file for my computer illiterate boss. I hope he never watches this. And by default, it opens it up. In this case, it opened up in my default browser, which is Safari, even though I was running in Chrome. And if you were to go to the folder that this is in, you would find it's called myresults.html. It is just an HTML file. There's no Jupyter notebookness, but all of the things that we want are all here. You know, the zoom and the pan and stuff, they all work. It's just straight HTML. So again, you could ship this file to your boss. The JavaScript is embedded in it. Everything's good. It's a single file. But that output file object is now floating around, ready to rear its ugly head. I go down here and I'm like, hey, I want to make a completely different figure now. It's called figure H, not figure P. And let me show H now. It's going to be an empty graph. There's nothing to it, but let me show H. When I say show H, it goes to myresults.html, and it overwrites everything in that file with nothing. Right? So, they do make mention of this in the user guide. I found it after the fact, scratching my head. But just be aware that that can happen, right? Go ahead.
That problem, the initial problem with the lines start stacking up.
Yeah.
Those are kind of unique to using this within the Jupyter.
Yep.
Right? If you were just running this as .py file, you wouldn't have that.
Absolutely. That should not be a problem. And so the point that he's making is if you wrote a script and you said, hey, in the script, import Bokeh, create a figure, create an HTML output, and you ran it as a .py file, it should make your output and everything is done because your script is finished running. We are in this kind of middle ground where we're in a Jupyter notebook and there's all these things floating around in the background. And because of that, it puts us in this semi-dangerous position where data we want to keep could potentially be overwritten if we're not aware that this is happening. So, all right. That's an excellent point. Thank you. All right. So those are some of the things that that I stumbled upon as I was going through this learning curve with Bokeh, right? And they can trip you up too. A number of these are, like I said, kind of mentioned in the user guide. You just have to hunt them down. But be aware, you're dealing with a very sophisticated tool stack. You're dealing with Python, you're dealing with Jupyter notebooks, you're dealing with JavaScript, and there's some CoffeeScript thrown in the middle of that, and you're dealing with JSON, object notations, and all sorts of craziness, right? So there's a lot of places where something can go wrong, which I think is a good testament to the power of this tool and the developers who are making it. It does a good deal of this stuff seamlessly, even though it's such a complicated system. All right, so let's go to servers. We're going to do a very simple server application. This is based on code in the Bokeh GitHub repository. I stripped down a few things and pulled a few things out, just in the kind of interest of time and interest of space. So a couple things. The Bokeh server is an attempt to kind of keep your browser and your data synced more effectively. So you want to have event response. When somebody interacts with the user interface, you want computations to be done on the server with the full power of the server and its computational engine, right, using Python. You potentially want to have some server-side updates automatically pushed out. If you're dealing with streaming data and you want to have the interface updated based on the streaming data, or in response to timeouts, this data is no longer valid, those kinds of things. The server can be run in two different modes. You can have it kind of local, individual use. Hey, I have a lot of data and I want to see it and I want to play with it. Or I'm going to stand up some sort of a server that folks from around the globe can access. We will focus the conversation today on local and individual use. That should get you started down the road and get you prepped for if you wanted it to create a deployable application. So behind the scenes, the Bokeh server, you have your application code. When a browser reaches out to your server, the application code will produce a document for that particular browser in that session. The document gets wrapped in this Bokeh JavaScript, the Bokeh.js library, which allows you to then interact with it, etc. And you can have communications back and forth between your browser and the server document that's been created for you and your session. Right? So you can have multiple sessions with independent documents. When we stand up this Bokeh server, we're going to use the stock data example that they've got. First thing we'll do is going to prep your environment. Oh God, this is horrible now that I think this through. Wow. All right, screw it. You've all got Bokeh, you've got Jupyter, you've got IPython, you've all got pandas, right? The only thing I want you to do is do this. Let me change this on the screen. Okay, we're going to do Conda. All right, you guys can just use your graphs. Just use the graph, virtual environment you're in. Go ahead and install Tornado 4.4.2. So here's the thing. I was doing this on my Mac, and everything was beautiful. It was glorious. Everything worked. It was awesome. And my colleague, Aiden, wanted, try and improve the robustness of this particular offering. Let's try it on a Windows system and see how well that works. So he dredged out an old Windows system, right, and tried to run it. And it had a more recent version of Tornado on it. It had like Tornado 4.5 or something. And yeah, that was bad news. So we checked. My Mac was running Tornado 4.4, so everything worked great. The Windows machine running Tornado 4.5, that was an epic fail. So this morning I reached out to the folks at the Bokeh development channel, and I spoke to them at about 11:22, and I said, hey, I'm trying to run my server, some certain things are happening, and I get some craziness, and it's ugly. Please save me, because I have a tutorial to do later this morning. And within 22 minutes, Luke kindly piped up and he said, hey, there's an incompatibility between Bokeh and Tornado for any version above 4.5. So the developer channel is chock full of folks. There's about 300 or 400 people in there over the course of time. They answer questions regularly. They're just, many of them volunteers, so, be kind, be gentle. But you can see just today, since this morning, they've had a lot of questions come in, and they've had a lot of good answers come rolling back out, right? So, all right. So yeah, Tornado's probably in there, but you might have a more recent version than you need, especially if you're on Windows. Blah, 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 blah. There we go. All right. If you go to GitHub and you download the zip file from them, you'll get the server application stuff. And we'll dig into that. So you want to save all of that to your graphs folder. Save it to your graphs folder. There we go. All right. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When you have unzipped that, if you change directories and go into the stocks folder, they actually have a script that will download some data, and that script is called download sample data.py. So run that with Python. And that'll put the data for this particular application in your graphs folder. Okay? And this is critically important. Don't miss this. Back out of it, otherwise a follow-on command is going to fail. So make sure you back out of the stocks folder. Go up one level into app. And when you get all that done, give me the little green flags and we'll move on. How's it going? Horrible. Awesome. So I tell you what, while that's downloading, let's just talk, right? And let's go look at some stuff. All right. So a couple things. Couple nuances here. I have the code to run the server, and I've cut and pasted some of it into these cells. These cells are not executable. They are written in Markdown, so you can't like click this and make magic happen. This is just to talk about. The server script is actually a Python file, and it's going to be downloaded, etc. So don't try and make these things run. We're going to look at the code here in the notebook. You'll go to your stocks folder. They'll have a file called main.py. The content in the notebook is greatly compressed and reduced for clarity. I strip out some duplicate or similar lines. I'm going to cut back on some details that we covered elsewhere in the workshop. I want to focus again on the things that are pertinent. If you do want to edit the code and play with it, you can do that. Just open main.py as soon as the internets allow you to finish downloading it. All right. So main.py, I open it up. It's got some sort of a header in it, and it talks about stuff. Hey, choose stocks in drop-down widgets, and magics happen. Histograms and summaries update. I snipped out some content in the middle that told you how to run the code. And then when the code is actually running, by default, Bokeh opens it up for access on port 5006. So you would go to your local host, use your browser, go to localhost :5006, go to stocks, and you should see a pretty awesome graph. All right, you should. They had some imports. They had some things related to function tools and things like that, least recently used objects, and they had some sort of a placeholder for that if you're using Python 2 versus 3. So I snipped all that junk out. Couple new things. We have pretext and we have select. We'll talk about those in more depth. Those are related to widgets that might appear on a model. We saw a row before to make a row of objects. If you're going to do a layout, we now have a new thing called column to do column objects, or a column of objects. And then we have this cur.doc, which allows you to interface with the server. Remember, the server is going to produce a document for all the folks who browse to it. All right. A lot of this is just Python. I did go through and I added a slew of comments to each of the functions, so you can read that at your leisure. I'm not going to go into much of this because this is just pure Python as opposed to Bokeh. But long story short, there's a bunch of folders. They all have CSVs or something in them with stock data for like 100 different stocks. We're going to look at stock values for 5 stocks. When I need to select from one of the drop-downs, I want to compare how Apple stocks performed in relationship to Yahoo, or how Google performed in relationship to Yahoo. And I'm going to have 2 different drop-downs. And if I select Yahoo in one drop-down, I don't want to compare Yahoo to Yahoo. So I want the other drop-down to update in real time and get Yahoo out of there. It's going to say, oh, he's already selected Yahoo. Let's just show him Apple, Google, INTC, and BRCM. Let's not show him Yahoo in this second drop-down. So Nix is going to take care of that for me. I've got some functions that are going to give me back a data frame if I give it a ticker symbol, and it'll have dates and closing prices. If you give it this function, get data, if you give it 2 ticker symbols, it's going to load a bunch of data and give you a data frame, but it will strip out anything where there's no values. The 2 data sets will get concatenated, and the columns get renamed. Again, this is all just pure Python, so we're skipping that. All right, this is Bokeh. In HTML, you have a tag called pre, and it allows you to essentially make kind of pre-formatted text. A lot of people use it to display like Courier new style of font or code style of font. So this creates a widget that displays blocks of pre-formatted text. It's all monospaced formatting. So I'm going to make a box that is 500 pixels wide, and we're going to set it up with no text to start with, but we will update stats later. So stats is going to be an object, and it'll be updatable. All right. The select function, it creates a drop-down widget so you can select things. You tell it a default value, which is, in this case, Apple and Google. It will then run that nix function to filter Google out of the Apple select drop-down and filter Apple out of the Google drop-down. And this will be updatable in real time. So when I change that later on, all this stuff will get manipulated in real time. All right. I'm going to create a data source. It's going to be a series of columns. So we'll have the date data. We'll have ticker 1, ticker 2. We'll have the return values for ticker 1 and 2. So we'll create a set of columns called source and another set of columns called source static. And we'll refer to both of those in our graph. I tell it what tools I want. Those are kind of standard. All right. But one thing to notice, and this perplexed me for a while. I searched the user guide and I couldn't find it. This one says X box select. Down here it refers to box select, and I could not figure out for the life of me what the difference between those two was. So again, I got into the developer chat on Gitter and I said, hey, and like 20 minutes later they're like, oh no, that's what this means. And they sent me a URL and pointed me in the right direction. So they did an absolutely fantastic job of kind of, helping folks in the community. All right. We'll talk more about what Xbox Select does. I'll show you. So I'm going to create a figure. It's going to be a correlations figure. This will be kind of a square. I set the plot width, plot height. I tell it the tools. In this case, I'm just going to use a regular box select, and we've been seeing that multiple times through the day. But I've got this preset tools that we'll use later in two different instances. Okay. All right. My correlation, it's going to be a circle graph. So I'm going to correlate ticker 1 returns versus ticker 2 returns, and I set colors. Notice these two right here, non-selection alpha and selection alpha. When you select something, you can choose an alpha value for it, and anything that is not selected can have an alpha value as well. If I wanted to change the color for things that are not selected, I could choose non-selection color and selection color. So a lot of these kind of colors can be tweaked depending on whether they are selected or not selected. So that's a cool function. All right. I'm going to make another figure. This one is going to be one of those kind of classic stock graphs that goes up over time, up and down. It's going to be 900 pixels wide. So it's going to be very wide but very short. And the x-axis type is going to be date time. So Bokeh should interpret this as date times. I think Mike was mentioning date times earlier. So I set x-axis type is equal to date time. And I'm going to set one of my tools to be active. There might be multiple drag tools on my toolbar. So my active drag tool is going to be Xbox Select. If you have multiple drag tools and you want one of them to show up with that little blue bar next to it to say that it's the tool that's currently selected, that's how you do that. I don't show it, but there is in the real code another one of these snippets that for ticker symbol 2 does the exact same thing. We're going to make some glyphs. We're going to start off by making a line. We're going to make some more glyphs out of circles. All right. I got a bunch more functions that as various values in the tickers change, I want to update stuff on the screen. Again, I'm not going to go into this. Most of this is just pure Python. Let's see. Some good stuff. Okay. Whenever a ticker object changes, so on change to a ticker object, call one of those functions to update some of the values. All right. Let's see. Again, a lot of this is just Python, so we're going to skip that. All right. How do we lay all this stuff out? Bokeh has a layouts mechanism. You can create a layout, and you can tell Bokeh to apply that layout to the graph that it's going to produce. In this case, and I'll blow this code up in a second, but in this case, I'm going to create a layout object, and it's going to be a column. And in that, I'm going to say, I want to have a main row and a series object. The main row is going to be a row of things. So I'm going to have two things in a row, side by side. The first object is just going to be a graph. It's going to be a glyph. But this item is going to be a column of widgets. And each of these are individual elements or glyphs to put on there. So I can lay rows next to columns, inside of rows, on top of columns. There's all sorts of variants that you can put here. So what we're going to see is a square graph. There's going to be a bunch of little manipulators over here that we can tweak. I'm going to have a place to show that pre-formatted statistical text. And I'm going to have two other graphs down here at the bottom that are going to show the ups and downs. So how do we lay all that stuff out? And if you're familiar with tools like graphical user interface design tools, tkinter, and those kinds of things. I say, all right, my layout is a column, and it'll have a main row, and it'll have the series. My series is also a column with two objects in it. My main row is a row with one object and the widgets thing, and the widgets thing is a column. So you just kind of nest these guys together. All right. And when I make my current document, I'm going to add a root level object, and that's going to be my layout, and it will nest all the things within that document. I'm going to set a title for it, and hopefully magic. All right, so how do I run the server? I'm going to go to my stocks folder. I'm going to, on the terminal, I'm going to type bokeh serve -- show and this little dot. That dot says check in this folder for a main.py. All right. If you leave that dot off, craziness happens. All right, so present working directory, I'm in the stocks folder. Bokeh serve tac show. I put the dot. Whoosh. All right. So let's go look at this first. It says, hey, Chalmer, we're starting the Bokeh server. It tells me what version, tells me what port to look on in case I forget. And it says, when you surf to localhost on that port, put a /stocks, and you'll get to where you need to be. And then it starts to tell me what's happening, and it kind of logs my interactions with it. All right. Let's see if we can blow this up a little bit. All right. So I've got this correlation on the left. I have my two ticker symbols. I got my stats, which should update in real time, and then I've got the little up and down graph. So let's do some stuff. Let's go select some things. Notice as I selected details up here in this graph, the other ones at the bottom automatically update as well. They are selected at the same time. If I mentioned we have this thing called an Xbox select. What the Xbox select does is it allows me to select data on the graph, similar to what I did here, but it actually selects in only one direction. You'll see when I try and drag and do some selection, it'll select everything on the y-axis all the way across. So grab, and notice it's selecting an entire box. So this selects across the X dimension. They have a Y-box select as well if you need to select in a horizontal direction. And notice these are completely interactive, right? I selected up here and this got highlighted. I select down here and this gets highlighted. So there's interactivity in both directions. If I need to select more than one thing, I care about the data here. I also care about the data over there. Again, you can use your shift button on your laptop to select more than one thing. Let's go reset that. Okay. So say I don't care about Apple anymore, and notice when I select on this drop down, it says Apple, INTC, BRCM, and Yahoo. Google is nowhere to be found because of that one function. So let's change this to Yahoo. Go down here, BRCM. Oh, don't tell me. Yep. So remember earlier, I said there was this wonkiness. The server app did some very wonky things. This is it. This is awesome in a horrible, horrible way. All right. Normally what is supposed to happen is these tickers are supposed to update in real time and everything's supposed to be good, and the stats box is supposed to update and show Apple and BRCM and NTC and stuff. And yeah, so this is crazy bad. Right, it's failing me epically. All right. I was never able to figure out how or why this occurred. All right. Let's see. Let's go in here. Nope, it's not working. All right. So, it gets wonky sometimes. That's legit. This morning, I ran it, everything worked. This afternoon I run it, and it doesn't. And I have yet to figure out all the nuances of why. So, haven't changed the code throughout the day, haven't touched it. Right. So, and with that, we'll move on to the next thing. Your mileage may vary. Okay. Sure.
Deployment scenarios. I mean, so you would have a new server for every app that you're running on your box, presumably listening. I mean, I guess, so you've got your main web server serving content.
Sure.
Or dynamic. And then you want to show a cool visualization. So that's going to be a new app. And you don't know if you map the Bokeh server into a URL hierarchy, or
So this particular example is just, I'm going to stand one up so you can play with it, right? When you get into creating an actual web application, and the visualization is just some subpart of all of your data, right? That takes on a whole nother level of complexity. There are mechanisms, and there is some write-up in the Bokeh server documentation to say when you need to build a deployable standalone app, right, that people are going to be interacting with, follow the following kinds of steps. You can use templating so that your data can fit into an HTML template. He mentioned using Jinja and things like that to create like a Django app or whatever. So there's mechanisms to embed your server outputs on your app, but that's well outside the bounds of this class. At this point, we don't even get this to work, right? And we still haven't figured out why. So it was crazy wonky. Like I said, it turned things on, turned things off. Do what? Shouldn't take that long. Yeah, it's got to go across the internet. Yeah, but these updates should be nearly instantaneous. I mean, as soon as I change one of these tickers and say, select this, the other ticker should be instantaneously updated, etc. It was pretty bizarre. I haven't figured it out. So I've got to get in the GitHub and identify that this is some sort of a glitch that I don't understand. Yeah. It was working on my machine this morning, so. Okay. We'll wait 8 hours. All right. So let's go back to the rest of our conversation. Sure. So I do not know where the problem lies. I don't know if it's my browser not talking to my server. I don't know if it's my server is not acting nicely. So you would have to go through kind of a series of debugging steps and try and figure out where the problem lies. I've played with this multiple times, and it has occurred at complete random, and it has been intermittent. Some days, again, without changing the code, I haven't touched the code, it runs great. Other days it doesn't, and I haven't figured out why yet. So, and it's the default app, right? It's not code that I created, it's their app. And on one occasion it works, on another occasion it doesn't. So it's wonky. Hence the reason it ended up in that section. All right, so we have like 1 minute left. Stuff to do. I highly recommend you read the manual. There's lots of good stuff in there. Read the functions themselves using the question mark. Go into the sample graphs. Let me pull up one of those. And go to the gallery, right? So this gallery has all of these various types of graphs. They're crazy good. Every graph has got code associated with it, so you can see how they made a layout with 9 graphs on a single figure, yada, 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 right? So go look at each of those things. Charting your course, all right? So go look at the sample graphs, play with them. A lot of the graphs have kind of tips and tricks that you'll come across and go, wow, that's pretty slick. You can figure out how effects are generated. In the user manuals, and I've alluded to this, there's lots of sample graphs throughout the user manual that aren't in this sample gallery. So as you're reading through the user manual, you're going to see cool stuff and go, wow, how'd they do that? Reuse the sample graphs a lot. They're pretty good. And most importantly, just make graphs. The more time you spend with Bokeh, the more you're going to come across those nuances, and you'll start to expand your understanding of it. And lastly, I've got a number of links for both the examples from the gallery, things from the user manual that were particularly useful for me, how to set up styling or annotations, the types of tools I could use and how to use them, how to set up the layouts that I wanted, etc. So those are some decent resources. And then some additional resources we've got. They've got the Bokeh manual. They have a notebook gallery where people have created Jupyter notebooks with graphs in them. The GitHub, if you get into their issues and their bug tracking and stuff, you can see conversations about some of the problems you might run across, and that can potentially help you. The style guide is great for visual attributes. And if you want to know more about Conda or Jupyter notebooks, there's some links for that as well. All right. There is a survey that I am told we would hope for you guys to look into. surveymonkey.r.pycon190. So surveymonkey.com. Can't spell survey monkey, right? Okay. /r pycon190. So you go to surveymonkey /r pycon190, and there's a survey. They're curious about how this went, right? So please provide feedback. The survey should not be very long. It's only about 10 questions, right? And they're all pretty straightforward. So I'll stick around for a little bit. Answer any questions for people who are shy. Do the best I can. I appreciate you coming. Hope you found some use in this. Grateful for the opportunity to speak to folks. So thank you.